the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Planning and Regeneration Committee. Thank you for joining us today. The purpose of today's meeting is to evaluate the impact of overheating on London's housing stock and the experiences of Londoners in both the short and long term due to climate change, as part of the committee's investigation into overheating in London's homes. Before we get started, please may I remind everyone to switch their devices to silent mode and ask that members and guests ensure that their electronic devices are not placed in front of their microphones. Please adjust your microphones so you can be heard clearly, and remember to lift them from the base if needed. Members of the public are encouraged to follow at London Assembly on various social media platforms. When using X, please include the hashtag #AssemblyPlanning for this meeting. Before we begin, we have a few items of business to attend to. Can I now ask our committee clerk, Sal Fazal, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Assemblymember Moama. Additionally, Assemblymember Baker will participate in the meeting remotely in accordance with Standing Order 2.4.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 28th of January and 11th of February 2026 to be signed by me as correct records? Can I ask the committee to note the completed, closed and ongoing actions arising from the previous meetings? Can I ask the committee to note the recent action taken by me as chair following consultation with party group lead members to agree the committee's letter on a better design for London? Can I ask the committee to note the response from the Mayor of London to its report, Gridlocked, How Planning Can Ease London's Electricity Constraints? We now move on to our main item of business, a discussion on whether London's homes are ready for a heatwave. We have structured our meeting into two panels, and I would like to welcome our guests for the first panel. In the committee room, we have Polly Turton, Head of Climate Action and Public Health, Shade the UK, and Dr. Mary Khosravi, Senior Research Fellow, University of East London. Joining us remotely, we have Emma Howard-Boyd, CBE, former Chair of the London Resilience Review. Thank you all for joining us. We now move to our questions, and the first question is from myself. We'll start with the panellists in the room. It is, what are the key risks with extreme heat?
Heat is a growing risk in London. There are direct heat-related risks to human health. You may recall the summer of 2022 when temperatures reached a record-breaking 40 degrees Celsius. Over 3,000 excess deaths were recorded in the UK, and many of those were in London, and many of those were in the over 65-year-old age group. So the risks are real, but that is the most kind of extreme realisation of those risks. Heat can also cause other health-related issues. People with existing health conditions can be exacerbated, particularly heart, respiratory, psychological conditions. So that is the kind of the human side of the risk. In terms of infrastructure, there is a growing demand for active cooling in homes in London. This is putting additional strain on our energy grid, causing knock-on effects on critical infrastructure.
Yeah, as Polly mentioned, there are some risks on health in terms of increasing heat-related mortality. There is also increasing.
Sorry, Dr. Wells, could you just bring the mic slightly closer to yourself? I'm not sure we're picking up on.
Is that okay now? Sorry. Yeah, as Polly mentioned, there are some risks in terms of heat-related mortality, but impact of risk can go beyond health impact, increasing cooling demand and pressure on national grid. And yeah, this is because of increasing AC adoption, which in London is much higher than other regions. But it's not only increasing pressure on national grid, there are also pressure on NHS and A&E services. So as we can see, impact of heat is not just building, it's about pressure on health, pressure on energy system, and yeah, energy challenges as well.
Thank you. Emma?
Thank you, and hopefully you can hear me okay from remotely. I'm very pleased to be here today and very pleased that the committee is looking at this area of heat risk. I actually think we need to emphasise that the impacts are here today, and already we are seeing overheating in our housing stock at a considerably high percentage, but I'm sure we'll get on to some of the details shortly. In addition to what Polly and Mary have talked about, I think it's also key to look at the cascading risks and impacts that our rising heat is bringing. And that was one of the reasons why the Mayor asked me to lead the London Climate Resilience Review, which we published in 2024, because not only did we see the high levels of temperature never seen in this country before and expected to occur in a decade or so time, the 2-3 days of 40-degree heat. Around that heat wave, we saw prolonged dry weather. We saw an increase in water usage up to 50% in London. We saw the ring of fire all the way around London, which brought, again, additional activity, extreme activity for the London Fire Brigade. And then what often happens at the end of a heat wave, it breaks with extreme rainfall when we saw surface water flooding. So really key to look at heat as existing impacts, having a massive impact on people's health, distributed unevenly across London. I think it was Hammersmith and Fulham who, in their evidence to the London Climate Resilience Review, stated that 18 lifts failed during the heat wave in council housing blocks during that time. Imagine if you're living in a housing, a high-rise, and the lifts have failed. And all of this needs to be taken in the context of where we are. That dry weather, that extreme heat is also leading to subsidence. So again, this is an area where the insurance industry is looking at in particular. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just following on, I think we'll come to Emma first and then to the panellists in the room. How are the risks of overheating different in London than in other parts of the UK? And are those risks being accounted for in planning decisions?
So again, one of the things that is of particular importance to London, but it also is relevant to other cities, is the urban heat island effect. And again, I'm sure those in the room are very experienced to talk about this, but given the density of housing, the range of different surfaces that we have across London, and you can see it in the heat maps that exist, that if you are closer to green spaces, you are going to be slightly cooler, and our green infrastructure can have a massive impact on reducing temperatures. But this heat island effect means that your cities are far hotter during periods of extreme heat than the slightly cooler suburbs and rural areas across the UK. I think the other reason why it's very important to focus on London, and this goes beyond the built environment into infrastructure, is the importance of London as a hub and a linking point to the whole of the UK. And you see that in the economics of London as well, that the London and the South East is a net contributor to the overall economy and economic wealth of the UK. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Emma. I'll just add, even before the urban heat island effect, London is the biggest city in the warmest region of the UK. Therefore, our baseline climate is just warmer than other cities in the UK. The urban heat island effect is apparent at both the city scale, so we're warmer relative to the green belt and rural areas around London, but there's almost like an urban heat island archipelago effect, across London, depending on what your building's made of, what surfaces your neighbourhood comprises, and whether you can see shade-giving trees from your home or walk to a green space from your home.
Yeah, as mentioned by Polly and Emma, the overheating risk in London is higher than any other region. Based on our evidence in 2022, when we experienced 40 degrees for the first time, experience of heat in London was 2 or 3 times higher than any other region. And this was when we experienced 40 degrees, but based on Metofis warning, there is possibility of experiencing 45 degrees under current climate in the UK. And based on climate resilience roadmap produced by UK Green Building Council, for the future, based on climate projections, combination of passive cooling together may not be sufficient to cover and prevent overheating in London region. So we need to have a kind of systematic adaptation approach, starting from city level, then building level, and behavior and human level.
Thank you very much. And just focusing on that bit about adaptation, the Climate Change Committee recently wrote to the government advising that it needed to start preparing for weather extremes that will be experienced with 2 degrees of warming by 2050 at least. What could that look like in London?
Well, I think the question of this panel meeting, with all due respect, is focusing whether homes are ready for a heat wave, when actually we'll be thinking about are the people who plan, design, manage, maintain, refurbish our homes ready for a heat wave, as well as the people who are living in those homes. So in some ways, the range of adaptation resilience measures available to us are relatively straightforward. They are very well evidenced with kind of, demonstrable data to suggest they would be effective in face of this kind of 2 degrees Celsius rise in global temperatures and how that plays out in London. But there's a huge culture shift required in order to make that the norm for how we plan, design, manage, use our buildings in London.
Based on our evidence, experience of overheating has increased a lot from 20% in 2011 to 80% in 2022 when we experienced heat like 40 degrees in London. And this data is from England, and London followed the same pattern. As I said, for the future, when we with higher temperature, a combination of active and passive together may not be even sufficient for the future projection. So, as I said, we need to have a systematic approach for adaptation.
And if I might come in, Chair, thank you. I'm just looking at the London Climate Resilience Review and a little extract from that. It's on page 77 for reference, and we heard from one housing provider who asked to remain anonymous that homes built in 2023 were overheating even in 2023's comparatively mild summer. So whilst it is really important to heed the advice of the Committee on Climate Change in terms of the risks that we may be facing by 2050, I come back to where we are today and the strong evidence that already our existing housing stock, and in London in particular, is overheating in what will be seen in the future as relatively mild summers. So I think you asked in your previous question about planning. I think it's as much also about the enforcement of flat planning decisions and whether our building regulations are up to or fit for the purpose for the types of heating that we're going to experience, not just today, but in the years and decades to come, and that every decision that is being taken in terms of building new housing, we are either investing in climate resilience to all of the impacts, but specifically heating, or we're locking in that vulnerability. And over time, that could cause real issues for the owners of this property, whether it's individuals or landowners. I'm wondering whether, as part of your call for evidence for the work that you are doing right now, whether there would be an opportunity for you to reach out to all of the large landlords across London, whether it's private housing or social housing, to ask whether they have done any assessments of the risk that already exists within their housing stock, because that might flush out some really interesting evidence for how seriously we need to take overheating of building right now and make sure that, in particular, the London plan is aimed at the right level, but has enforcement attached to it as well, so that people living in those homes can live in comfort. Thank you.
Yeah, that is definitely something we can look at, and thank you very much for your contributions. Assembly Member Both.
Actually, something that I'm quite interested in before I ask my question is what the contribution is. I mean, we're a city and we're warmer, but you say the cooling effect can be localised, so it's going to vary from in the city. But overall, the city is hotter than the surrounding areas. That's fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, that's fair to say, absolutely.
And it would be, because we're denser, what is the contribution of green spaces to ensuring that heat effect is dissipated?
In short, it's huge. The role, for example, of one tree in providing physical shade and then additional evapotranspiration, which is the process of water rising through the roots and out through the leaves, can lead to up to an 8 degrees Celsius reduction in temperatures underneath that tree and around that tree. So if you think about those kinds of temperature reduction sort of ranges, and you think about how many trees we could be planting across London as just one example of an adaptation and resilience measure, the impact could potentially be huge. But it may not always be possible to kind of plant trees, and so physical shade structures. We did some work with Camden Council in the Holborn Livable Neighbourhood area of the borough, and we demonstrated how physical shade structures can also reduce temperatures hugely.
We'll come on to those techniques later on, but I'm a bit focused on the green space and that they are a massive and natural contribution. So the city is hot as a city. To what extent, if we were to chip away at the green belt, which is currently proposed by the mayor, if we were to chip away at that, would that present risks for that overall heat profile of the city?
I think it comes back to good planning and design decisions and choices. So you could get, for example, a really poorly designed block of flats surrounded by a big expanse of green space that was at high heat risk, or you could get a well-designed kind of building with kind of inbuilt shade and passive measures in that same green space, and it would be better at keeping its residents comfortable. So it's not quite as black and white or green and grey. I think it comes down to how the surrounding neighbourhood informs the design of the individual homes and the blocks and the kind of developments within which they exist.
Thank you for that.
May I come in on that?
Actually, I was going to ask you. Actually, please do.
I think we also need to look at how that green infrastructure, those green spaces, can provide many different benefits, not just to getting ready for climate change and the multiple hazards, but for those living nearer those green spaces. And again, if you were to look at some of the heat maps that exist of London and compare that to the maps of green spaces, there is, a strong correlation between where we've got green spaces and lower temperatures. I think it is just as important in planning decisions to make sure that those areas of London which have a huge amount of concrete are greened up as much as possible, but then within the mix we're looking at a range of different surfaces. So in some parts of the world, different colours are being used on those surfaces. We also need to look at how permeable those surfaces are, because that will help with surface water flooding. So the whole issue needs to be taken together and taken as a whole, but making sure that we're thinking of all of those benefits. So adding to some areas of London which are very have a lot of hard surfaces, smaller pockets of green will help from a cooling perspective, but will also help for absorbing water during those periods of extreme rainfall. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think there's a general conclusion that green space is important in London. If we move on to the Mayor's developed or developing London Heat Plan, I wonder what contribution that could be to the reducing the overheating in London. How might that work, Dr. Khosravi?
London Heat Plan has several components, such as heat network expansion, green infrastructure, cooling infrastructure. As we can see, most of these measures are more structural, but there is some opportunity to consider kind of risk communication, and Londoners need to get familiar with the risk of heat and understand how they can protect themselves when heat coming. So while the main component of Heat London Plan are mostly about structural measures, which are expensive, long-term, and complicated in terms of implementation, we can also focus on risk communication and reducing heat impact and risk, such as mortality, through risk communication. This is really important in the UK context, where there is no culture of heat. People are not familiar with heat, and we always consider heat as a nice weather, so we don't look at it as a risk. So people don't take action. The risk perception of heat is really low in the country. So we can consider these kind of measures in London Heat Plan as immediate, less expensive, and it is exactly fit with the London Plan because it can be implemented at regional level and London level, generally city level.
It sounds like what you're trying to say is mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun, which is some truth in that, isn't there? Ms. Turton.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, from what I understand, the London Heat Plan is being framed as the London Heat and Investment Plan, and I think that's the key thing. It's one thing to have a plan, but I think we need a plan to implement the plan and invest in the things within the plan. So I believe that is ongoing and will be a key element of it. As Mary highlighted, as well as the kind of very necessary kind of physical adaptation and resilience measures that we need in London, we do really need to understand what's going on, in individual households and communities during heat waves and hot weather. And there's a huge evidence base feeding into the London Heat and Investment Plan, looking at lived experience and kind of stakeholder perspectives on heat in London. So there's that qualitative evidence base as well as the kind of quantitative kind of evidence for doing something about it.
Thank you. And Ms. Howard-Boyd, what contribution would the London Heat Plan make, or could the London Heat Plan make?
Thank you for the question. I first want to say that I'm really delighted that this heat delivery plan, heat action plan, heat investment, it's got many names to it, but firstly that it's being worked on, and that we are due to see this be published by the summer is what I'm hearing. So really pleased, because this was a key recommendation of the London Climate Resilience Review, that London needed a heat plan. I know that a lot of work is going on right now. Some of that has been funded by the European Union as part of their Pathways to Resilience funding scheme, which again is extremely important, that it is not only focusing on London, but London is able to tap into what other parts of Europe are doing to get ready for heat. And Polly is absolutely right that that the fact that it is being worked on alongside an investment plan will mean that the work that needs to be generated and delivered on the back of the plan will immediately start looking at how this is funding. I think there's something that Mary said that I would like to challenge, which is about the cost of getting ready for extreme heat and other climate hazards. I think we need to reframe how we say that, because if we don't do that work, it is going to be even more costly. And I think this is where either you and your committee chair, but also working with the mayor and probably 2 or 3 of the deputy mayors, there is a real opportunity to work with the business and the investment community of London and ask and understand how they are going to step up to the challenge of climate change that we are facing in this city. And I think that is one of the really important opportunities that we mustn't squander when we launch this heat delivery plan. In recent weeks, I've been talking informally to a number of the the landlords, be they private sector or public sector, and I think they would like to be challenged and engaged with London, with the GLA, even more in terms of getting their property ready for extreme heat. So I think this is something that could really help with stepping up and underpinning the work that the teams at the GLA are conducting right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Lord Bailey. Apologies, Assembly Member Garrett. Robert.
It's all right. It happens all the time. So they confuse my surname sometimes with another Assembly member, but it's fine. Thanks for your contributions, everyone. Just before I start, I should have probably noted at the beginning that when I was in my North Central London Integrated Care Board role, I did make a contribution to the London Climate Resilience Review. It's not a job I hold anymore. I left 2 years ago, but just thought it was important to note that I'd made that contribution. My question's about how significant the problem is of overheating in London's housing stock. I feel like you've spoken to this a bit already, just in some of the contributions already, but I just wanted to say, is there anything extra that people wanted to speak to in terms of how significant the problem is in the housing stock? Polly, you look like you want poised to come in.
Yeah, I have a couple of statistics which might help to bring the issue to light. In the social housing sector alone, it is estimated that almost 75% of those homes are at high risk of overheating. And over 1 million children in London are living in homes at high risk of overheating, most of those within those social housing homes. So there are other figures and statistics about housing stock more generally in London, but I just think it's all about how this affects the most vulnerable people in society, whether that's due to age and your physical ability to cope with the heat, or your levels of income or deprivation, which affects your ability to cope with the heat too.
We do have questions on that a bit later, but yeah, thank you for highlighting that. Did you have anything additional just on that?
Yeah, we had a recent survey on experience of overheating in London, in England and London as well. And the data is very close to what Polly mentioned. In London, nearly 87% of Londoners experience overheating during heat wave last year. So it's very close to the data that Polly mentioned. So the risk is there and is significant.
Yeah, that's really what we're highlighting, and I'm glad we're looking at this. Emma, was there anything else in addition to just like how significant the problem is in overheating in housing stock? And then I've got some follow-ups.
Yeah, in preparation for this meeting, I was in contact with, and Mary's already mentioned them, the UK Green Building Council in relation to their UK Resilience Roadmap. And they prepared a short paper for me, which I have permission to send in to you as evidence. So it's a report that they did with their technical experts, Hawley, and just as a headline, they are saying that over 55% of UK homes are already at risk of overheating. And then it goes into some specific London figures. But I think, the figures that you're hearing from both Polly and Mary just shows how real a problem it is today, as well as for new build homes. And I think focusing on those that are most poor and vulnerable to living in those heating conditions and understanding the internal temperatures, so what it's like to live in those buildings, because actually we're experiencing discomfort at much lower temperatures, and the temperatures which are now part of our normal summer. So virtually every year we are seeing overheating, and then associated with that the knock-on health consequences, which we are still not able to measure as we need to do in order to find out precise figures of excess deaths. So we have figures for excess deaths, but again, some of the evidence that was submitted to me and conversations that I've had subsequently to the London Climate Resilience Review from healthcare professionals is that not necessarily noting when an illness or indeed a fatality is linked to health. What we will see in our stats is where an underlying condition has led to death. So I think from wherever we're looking at it, we're underestimating the impact that this is already having today. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that really does clearly highlight it. And we do come on to other questions around this later, but I have found it really interesting and frustrating, the lack of kind of focus or investment in retrofit, just finding that from government and just where that sits in City Hall. And I think that you've just really highlighted the just risk in the current stock.
Can I come in again, because I'm worried about forgetting this point, and I think it's quite important, in that today the consultation on that MHCLG is leading on the National Planning Policy Framework is closing. And from a lot of attention, I've been working with others in relation to flood protections being reduced. There is a nod towards other climate risks in this, but I hope that there is a way that the work that you are doing right now can be fed into that consultation, even though the consultation is closing today, because I think this is just too important an issue not to be presented in a strong way to MHCLG.
Thank you for that. And I was going to come on to new housing being built today, being resilient to overheating that we've experienced. Like you're saying, it's the new norm with these hotter summers. And I did want to kind of pick up on anything, any reflections you might have on the Mayor's emergency house building measures. One of them is to propose to remove the requirement for new flats to be dual aspect. So within that context, I was just wondering if you feel like that's going to have an impact on climate resilience of new builds. So yeah, how can we make sure that what's being built is resilient? Polly.
Well, I think the existing cooling hierarchy in the existing London plan is a really scientifically informed, evidence-based approach to keeping new build homes comfortable by following that principle of starting with external shade before you then consider other measures, and then the last consideration is active cooling within the space. The issue of dual aspect, that comes under ventilation, which is incredibly important to ensure thermal comfort, health and safety in homes. But it depends, again, on the planning and design choices made for those new homes. It's a combination of things which results in the internal thermal comfort levels within that home.
So do you feel like the new homes being built today are going to be resilient to the overheating that we've experienced?
Yes and no. Some new homes that I'm seeing have got passive design measures integrated into the design, the fabric of the buildings that the homes are within. For example, a block of flats with external shaded balconies, for example. Others, you look at them and you just know that it must be incredibly uncomfortable and probably unsafe for the people living inside them.
Thank you. Did you want to come in?
Yes. Building regulation has changed recently, has revised to consider passive cooling strategy in new build in 2022. But the fact is there is no data and evidence to show whether these revision and Part O has been effective or not. So we don't know whether new buildings are going to be more resilient based on the revision or not. There is no data to prove that these even compliance can provide some comfort in terms of overheating.
So we don't know if it's being delivered, or we don't know if it's having an impact, or both?
Even even implementation of Part O has some problem. There is no enforcement like the other aspect of building regulation, and there are some conflict between different parts of building regulation. This is in terms of enforcement and implementation, but in general there is no data to show whether even if it is implemented properly, it is effective or not, whether passive cooling is enough or not. So we can't say whether it can end up to the comfort or not.
Thank you. Emma, anything to add on this bit about the new homes that are being built?
Only to refer back to what I said earlier about evidence given to us anonymously in 2020, in the run up to 2024, that homes were still being built unfit for the summers we have today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go back to you, Chair. I've got some more questions on the vulnerabilities bit, but I'll come in later.
Thank you, Assemblymember Garbutt, and apologies for the mispronunciation earlier. Assemblymember Lord Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start with Polly. Shade UK has called for investment into better data. What does that look like? Because the doctor just talked about what seemed to me a lack of data. Nobody's testing. Are we talking about lab testing? Are we talking about measuring things we already have? What does better data look like?
So, good question. And first of all, we have some very good data already. For example, the GLA's climate risk maps show which local super output area neighbourhoods of London are at most risk of heat, and we also have good census data and indices of multiple deprivation data, which shows us where perhaps the most vulnerable people might be living. But I think we need more data on a number of levels. The first is monitoring real-time temperatures in outdoor spaces and indoor spaces across London. It's very cheap these days to install a sensor that collects a range of data. For example, air quality sensors are everywhere. If we were better informed about just how hot it was getting in particular places in London, I think that would be a really good additional source of data. I think one thing that we've talked about is, the difference between existing homes and new homes. We are developing ideas for an overheating index for homes, a bit like an energy performance certificate, which would give people data and information about the likelihood of their new flat to overheat, and that might inform, consumer choice for those who are able to afford, their own rents and purchasing their own homes. This might lead to a sort of market shift in kind of assigning greater value to homes which are comfortable during hot weather. So those are just two examples of kind of two data sets that I think would be very valuable to address heat risk in London.
Doctor, you talked about not having enough evidence to suggest the particular change you were talking about would be impactful. How would you go about getting that data?
As Polly mentioned, it's about real-time monitoring. We can simply put some loggers in a new build and understand whether how is the temperature after considering Part O. So it's about real-time monitoring, which is absent, especially in, it's not only about residence building, it's about high-risk settings such as hospital, care homes, prisons, there is no data, qualitative, quantitative. We don't know how they take action, how they react when heat wave coming in these kind of settings, and we don't know about the real-time monitoring, how is the temperature, what temperature reach in that kind of high-risk setting. So there is a lack of data. And without data, the risk will be invisible. Only through providing some data, we can make the impact of risk visible and to take action and prioritize overheating.
And to our online guests, what does better data sets look like to you? What would you like to see, and how would we collect that data?
I think I'm very nervous that our call for more data means that we don't take action, because there is an awful lot of data that exists. Whether it is precisely the right data and whether we are able to join that data up is perhaps as important a question. So I go back to whether there is an opportunity to go to landlords today who may be assessing this aspect of their housing stock. Some will be, some won't, and whether that could be put into a central pot so that we get a much clearer understanding of what we are facing today. Again, I'm just looking at the data, or the mini report that the UK Green Buildings Council has sent to me. And it's what one stat that I'm looking at says our finding shows that people living in apartments will generally be at higher risk than houses. Thermal modelling shows that for people living in 3 million apartments in London and the South East will face on average extreme discomfort for approximately 35 days by 2050. So, you know, there's so much information that we already have that calling for more data mustn't slow down some of the important decisions we need to make today, whilst also understanding that we need to make sure we're making the right decisions in terms of the solutions that already exist.
Excuse me, let me just test some of that with you. So London has built considerably more flats in recent years than it has built houses. That would suggest that they're newer buildings, and would suggest, and please challenge me if I'm incorrect, that they are in better condition, better able to deal with heat and cold than older buildings. So without that data, are we making an assumption based on what you said, or would data be useful to challenge some of those assumptions?
I suppose I'm wondering whether more of that data exists and it's not yet in the public domain.
Okay, Polly, maybe?
I would add there is some very good data. If you may be familiar with post-occupancy evaluation methods, whereby newly built residential developments are subject to a kind of programme of stakeholder engagement and surveying, and data shows that new builds that kind of maybe just missed more recent building regs and policy kind of enhancements are overheating. You know, there is quantitative and qualitative data telling us this. So echoing Emma, there is a lot of good data out there already, but we just need to be smarter in how we use it. And then if we are collecting these additional sources of data, integrating that into the evidence base we already have. Our work has been about getting those qualitative stories at Shade UK about what it's like to live in those homes, and we know they are overheating, as well as the kind of quantitative data available.
Just two things on data. I want maybe you could write to committee if you can't answer them off the top of your head. Do we have a figure that constitutes overheating in a room, in a dwelling, so you have a proper comparator? And on this issue of access thefts, can we see the what's the words I'm looking for? The methodology behind calculating those access thefts. I don't expect you to pour out now because we have a time constraint, but it'd be very interesting to see what is the methodology, the epidemiology behind these things, and also what is the comparator that we use. Because if you ask people, are they overheating, my mother will give you a very different response to my daughter, let's say, and I wonder if we actually have a comparator. But I just leave that with you to come back to committee with. I want to move on now to the issue of typology, because as I said earlier on, London has built significantly more flats than houses, but somebody in the panel made a comment that houses are less likely to be overheated. Flats are the typology that London is probably going to be building for quite some time now. So are there certain types of building that are more susceptible to this, you know, tall flats, for instance, than others? I'll start with Polly, please.
Thank you. So there are some factors which make a building more likely to overheat than others. And also those newly built flats that maybe are solely reliant on active cooling might tick the box of achieving thermal comfort for the residents. But if there was a grid failure or if the AC system broke down, that would not be a very resilient flat in a heat wave. Going back to the cooling hierarchy, I think, you know, we should remember that there is a kind of tried and tested way of ensuring thermal comfort for the majority of homes and flats in London. External shade, I cannot stress enough how effective it is at blocking unwanted heat and solar gain. We should be seeing external shading much more often on our new build flats and homes in London, I would say. However, there is a space for active cooling for those flats where you may have more vulnerable residents, which I know we're going to be touching on shortly. So, you know, there are good design principles that we can be already using more and more smartly in terms of how we build these new flats in London.
I want to come back to this question of active cooling, because then that gives the building a far larger energy footprint, which is then a different problem. So is active cooling second place to passive cooling? Is there a building type that can provide enough passive cooling so you don't need any active cooling? Is that possible?
There are certain, you know, moving around London on a daily basis, I see good examples of new build homes, which in the written evidence submission we can provide examples where you just know, looking at for example, it's made of brick. The balconies have got a kind of a lid on them. It kind of protects the residents from the heat. You can see some of them are dual aspects, some of them may not be, but you can kind of start to look for the clues of what makes that home a more comfortable and safe home to live in. I think the ones which are most concerning are the kind of sealed box, fully glazed blocks of flats where, the glazing is causing the overheating issue, and any active cooling that is installed is working harder than it needs to because there's no other passive measures to kind of keep that building comfortable.
Thank you. And Emma, I want to come to you and ask what for me is a very big question. Is there a tension between our housing need in London and the need to resist this overheating? Because many of the things we're talking about sound expensive to me. Expense is often passed on to the end user. We already know that rents, mortgages, all sorts of stuff in London are hugely expensive. So where does the middle ground lie? Is there a tension there?
Thank you, and again, it's a great and important question, but I would argue that if these measures are designed in from the beginning and implemented, they are much more affordable than we would otherwise suggest. And also, if these properties become unlivable in short order, then no one will want to live in them, or you're building traps for people. So I think somehow we need to reframe the economic, the way we talk about investing in that future resilience as opposed to the additional costs, because over time, I think those investments will mean that we're providing safe places for people to live in the future, in future conditions.
So I'm just going to jump around. Please, anybody answer this question, because it's just some small little things that bother me. We talk about the positive effect of greening a place and the water dispersion as well. But is that possible on top of the concrete pad we have? So, you know, I live in Romford. Much of Romford is a concrete pad. Can you just add green to it, or does something special need to happen?
Really good question. I mean, there are areas of London which are a lot greyer and harder than others. It may not be possible in all areas to plant new trees, but shade structures may well be a good solution in those particular areas. However, there are other, you've seen like sustainable drainage systems and suds and swales all around London. If designed right, they can also provide cooling benefits for the neighbourhoods in which they are implemented. So it's about looking at co-benefits for other public realm and sort of highways and transport interventions that could benefit London in terms of heat risk too.
Okay, and I have a question much on that does water, like large bodies of water, provide the same sort of cooling effect that a large patch of grass would?
There is a comparable cooling effect, but it depends on the size of the water body. And I should add that green infrastructure only stays green by being watered, so there is this really close correlation between blue and green infrastructure. Okay.
Does a passive...
Just quickly.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So again, I think we also need to look at our surfaces, and as some of our public realm is maintained, whether there's an opportunity to change some of those surfaces to those that absorb less heat and are more permeable, because again, that will help from a water perspective. I think it's also really key from a green infrastructure and heat plus drought perspective that planning is also takes into consideration some of the growing risks around subsidence, and where trees in particular are planted near to property. Again, a report that was published in October last year by Aviva highlights that there is a growing risk. So it's the Building Future Communities report, and it found that this is a UK-wide figure, but it really does focus in on London. An additional 1.4 million properties could be at risk from subsidence by mid-century due to soils shrinking in hot, dry weather. So all of this needs to be taken into account in the round, but that's about the right kind of tree planting and the right distance from properties.
Chair, thank you very much. Chair, my last two small questions. Does a passive, maybe the doctor leaping, does a passive building have a greater effect externally? So concrete warms up. If a passive building is holding out all this heat, where is that heat going? So if someone can answer that for me. And also, can we absorb some of this heat? Because heat is energy. We are in an energy deficit situation. Could we be absorbing this heat and turn it into something else?
Yeah, there are some kind of combined energy system, like hybrid heat pump that can absorb that heating and turn into to cooling energy. So this kind of combined energy can be used to convert the energy. Sorry, I forgot the first part.
The effect of a passive building externally.
Yes, please.
It comes down to the material choices. So you're right, a building made of anything sort of human-made, whether it's brick or concrete, will absorb heat during a hot day and then will re-release it at night. The lighter colours of those human-made materials will absorb less and therefore release less at night, but it will still reflect heat and light during the day. So it's about considering kind of where is that building, you know, is glare the bigger issue during the daytime, or is thermal comfort in the evenings and the night time a bigger issue? I think the use of green infrastructure and nature-based solutions around passive buildings, passively designed buildings, is key. So, you know, verandas, pergolas, trellises, it doesn't need to be intensive green infrastructure. It just can be, you know, gardening and kind of plants around these kind of harder surfaces can have noticeable cooling benefits for those homes.
Because I notice I live in a house that's London brick, and in the night the the heat radiating from the buildings is actually quite nice. But it's obviously got some thermal mass there, and I wonder, should we be turning that into energy or not? And
it would be tricky to, I think, turn that particular kind of re-radiated heat into energy. But for any actively cooled building, I think there's huge potential to use the waste heat kicked out the back of those air conditioning systems for positive effect. So looking at usage of by buildings that need that heat, even in hot weather, perhaps kind of swimming pools, leisure centres, laundrettes, anything that kind of still needs heat when it's hot, might be something to explore.
And what about large commercial buildings? The centre of London's filled with buildings that are glass boxes. Is it possible to just absorb that heat? Some of that heat must be able to be converted into something useful.
Again, I would kind of look at the active cooling systems as that source of heat. Okay. I think, but the choice of materials for those tall, shiny commercial buildings, I think, could be given some thought in terms of their impact on the local microclimate around those buildings. And there's been some great work done by the City of London and academics in London on that particular issue, which we can submit written evidence about.
Yeah, because parts of Liverpool Street are warm because of the buildings, and then you turn the corner and it's a completely different temperature because there's no reflection there. Chair, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Boff.
Just very quickly, there is some relation between typology of buildings and the urban heating effect. Is it more challenging to design a tall building which will overcome urban heating than it is for a lower rise building?
So a couple of things, and apologies just for kind of bringing it back to very simple kind of terms, but, heat rises. So if you have a taller building, the properties at the top of that building will generally be warmer on average than the ones in the lower part of the building. Also, the taller the building is, the less likely it is to benefit from overshadowing and shading from surrounding trees and other buildings. But it doesn't mean that building is more likely to overheat than a sort of medium rise or lower rise building, because there are a number of factors at play. And I have seen some very well designed tall buildings which are kind of comfortable and safe for their residents, as well as the less good ones.
Yes,
May I come in?
Yes, please do.
If Mary wants to go in first, that's fine.
Ms. Khosravi.
Yeah, some research shows that different type of typology and dwelling house affect overheating, but I'm talking based on our research. Our research shows that what has more impact on experience of overheating is the building design, how we design our building, whether the building has cross ventilation, the orientation of building. So it's more about building design rather than type of dwelling, whether it is flat, high, low. And it's not just about building design, it's about residents' behavior in the flat. As you mentioned, youngers experience heat differently from elderly. Different factors of demography can affect the experience of heat and how we cope with the heat. For example, age is one of the factors that can affect the experience of heat and risk of heat. Elderly, old population, as I said, they have low risk perception, so they take less action to protect themselves. And it's also about the different factors of demography, income, whether we're going to apply cooling technology, we have AC in our home, fan, or these kind of things. And also it's about whether we know we are exposed to risk communication. We know that heat is, extreme heat is on, or we take any action. So human behavior, residents' behavior in the building.
I wasn't really trying to get to... I know that you can design in good cooling, but I'm just trying to establish if it's more challenging to do that in a tall building. Because very often during the planning process, we kind of drop off a few objectives during the planning process, and we end up with a compromise. And it's so often the thing we wanted most of all is left out. That was my concern.
If I could just come in
Yes,
with an
please do.
example of a building that I think was completed just over a decade ago, but already it's quite a tall building, mixed use in central London. They're having to put internal shading because there's a huge amount of glass in it, and again redo the energy system to build in that resilience in case of energy failure because of the heightened need to rely on air conditioning. So again, this shows that within a relatively short period of time, things that were believed to be state of the art when they were given planning permission are already having to be refurbed. And I think that shows why it is so important to highlight this investment in what will make a building, a home, relevant for a longer period of time, and stop thinking of it as an additional cost. It's about making that building be enduring and provide a comfortable and safe space for people to live. And that's particularly relevant for those poorer and vulnerable members of our society. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And just continuing on, obviously we just heard about different impacts of height on overheating. What about building materials themselves? So what is the difference and what is the effect of brick versus stucco versus concrete on heat retention?
So the committee may be familiar with the term albedo or the albedo effect. So depending on the colour, to start with, of a material is more likely to absorb or reflect heat, as Lord Bailey mentioned earlier. I think, certain materials work in different ways. So a brick building will kind of provide some degree of insulation from the heat, and it'll be slightly better than a kind of very thin kind of, composite material used for the facade. So, there are some published resources out there showing kind of relative merits of different materials. I think it depends again on location, design choices, etc. But I think materials which reflect heat cause problems outside, and I think high insulation levels in with new build homes can cause major overheating issues if there isn't sufficient ventilation or external shade preventing the heat hitting the facades and the windows of those homes.
Thank you. That actually segues me on very nicely to my next question, which is what role does focus on heat retention in housing design play in the increasing the risk of overheating during the summer? And how can we strike that balance? Because obviously, if we were holding this meeting in December, the focus would be on how cold many of our constituents' homes are, and the problems of winter fuel poverty, etc., not be able to heat homes. So how do we strike that balance between ensuring that buildings are well insulated, are warm during the winter, and not leading people to have to spend inordinate amounts on their energy bills, but then actually in the summer they're not greenhouses?
I think we can, in terms of making a balance between winters and summer, we can learn some of the experience from other countries. There is no contradiction between having a good insulation and ventilation, so a cross ventilation, considering these kind of passive cooling strategies in building design doesn't mean that we can have a cooler winters. So even in terms of if you go to when we walk in southern European countries like Italy, Greece, we can see that all windows have shaded, they have shelter. So there's no contradiction between winter and summer. Having shelter and these kind of strategies can reduce overheating and cooling energy demand for nearly 40%, which is quite high. So we can make a balance between what we need for winter as an insulation and what we need for summer as a cooling and ventilation.
I was encouraged to see the government's warm homes plan refer to the need for year-round thermal comfort retrofit in the context of existing homes. I think we all need to start thinking about the whole year round and thermal comfort in all seasons. You mentioned the very real issue of fuel poverty. We're beginning to see in the UK potential cool poverty, people who are unable to keep their homes cool. So there is this correlation between the homes which are uncomfortable in winter with those which are uncomfortable in summer too. So yeah, I'll pause there.
Emma, did you have anything to add on this question?
Yeah, thank you. I think Polly's point about, again, the warmer homes policy coming out earlier this year, or was it last year? It's a bit of a blur, but the joining up of different issues that often sit in different departments, I think that point is relevant as well for combined authorities. And I think across the GLA, you have a lot of experience from different officers sitting in different teams. And I think the challenge, and it's something we wrote about in the London Climate Resilience Review, is how you get this really expert information together when in a joined up way. Because when we were talking earlier about health, I can think of some of the brilliant people you've got working on health issues and making sure that they're in the same room when green infrastructure is being talked about, when other aspects of the built environment are talked about. And I think this is going to be really essential for the GLA, given the range of cuts I understand is going to be made across different teams, making sure that expertise isn't lost, but also some of the ways that they work together is actually enhanced so that different aspects of expertise come together as you're working on planning or environment or climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Assemblymember Garbett.
Thank you. This has been really fascinating, but also quite alarming. My question is around, so we're going to just talk about some of the stuff you've picked up already about kind of vulnerabilities and demographics. So studies found that, Mary, I'm going to come to you first. So studies have found that renters experience of overheating more than homeowners. Can you speak to that and why is this?
Yeah, because they have... people live in rental property, they have less agency to make a change. For example, if they're going to adopt air conditioners, there are some limitation. If they're going to put shading or these kind of strategies, there are some limitation. It's different when you have your own home or you are in a rental home. And it's about their, is their income, their affordability is one of the factors that can affect overheating risk. And I don't see any other, I don't know, based on our data, it's more about the affordability and agency that can affect overheating risk. I don't know if...
And just to pick up on that, do you have any comments on what the Renters' Rights Act will be doing? Because obviously that it talks a lot about kind of improving the quality of homes. Do you think it speaks to this issue enough in terms of overheating?
I don't know if it is mentioned enough, but I don't have idea.
Okay, no, that's fine. It's just I'm chair of Housing Committee. We're currently looking at the Renters' Rights Act, so it's kind of a bit of a read across between the two investigations. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question. You mentioned the social housing sector and the number of children in London at risk of overheating. But I think vulnerable people don't just live in social housing. I think the private rented sector is a really challenging sector in terms of heat risk, especially homes of multiple occupation and high density kind of households in terms of numbers per people per room, for example. So yeah, the rental sector in general does have a bit less agency, but you can get some really excellent rental properties, you know, and I think there are also homes that people owner occupiers who might be vulnerable, maybe sort of 65-year-olds plus, who don't have anyone around them, they could still be vulnerable to heat, even though they've got a seemingly bigger, more valuable property to live in. So the risks, are slightly more complex than you might think, but there are clearly some vulnerability groups and sort of problem areas in kind of rental sector properties.
And I found it really interesting what you were saying earlier. So I don't know if I wrote the stat down right. Did you say that 75% of the council stock is at risk? Yes. In London, that was?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Because I was going to ask, obviously, just if you could speak to that disparity between kind of the more kind of affluent areas where there is more likely to be trees, access to that kind of space, that we know that disparity in access to green space, and what you've just described around council housing. And what it made me think of as well is the pressure on councils to do kind of infill builds on council estates and things like that. So there's a pressure for them to further lose kind of green space and trees within those, within some of those areas as well. So I didn't know if you could speak to some of that.
I think the thing about heat risk, it is almost like an overlay on existing inequalities and inequity. And I think, as we saw in COVID, those inequalities and inequities just become even more apparent. And I think heat risk does something very similar. You might have come across the author Peter Apps. His very excellent book, Homesick, highlights that towards the end of the book, how all these existing issues with our housing stock are only going to be exacerbated by climate change impacts and are already. I think the issue about communal areas around existing social housing is really interesting. I think where budgets are tight and kind of, let's say, retrofit or kind of thermal comfort measures may be seen as kind of cost prohibitive, improving the quality of the public realm around those homes can make a huge difference to the ability for those residents to keep themselves cool during heat waves and access cooler outdoor spaces, outside their homes. So I think we do need to look at these issues in the round and consider indoor spaces and outdoor spaces together, and kind of look at neighbourhoods, not just blocks of flats.
Great point. Emma, did you want to come in on that one at all?
I think you raise a great point about different committees that you sit on, different bills that you might be looking at. Heat is something that at a national level, at a regional level, at a local level has been very low on the agenda. So I think you're probably starting in places at a very, very low base, and therefore making sure that those questions are being asked either at the local, regional level, or when you're facing into national government, I think is really important, because again, I go back to the point that every decision we're making, we're either locking in that future vulnerability or we're building in that climate resilience, and we can't go more quickly enough. And then all the work that I have seen shows that it is those people who are poorer, have vulnerabilities, that are most exposed to this risk. Thank you.
I think that's so stark and pretty terrifying that we're just going to exacerbate the existing inequalities that we have in the city. I had a question just about what steps the GLA, the public environment the built environment sector and government can take to support groups with increased vulnerability to heat waves. So it's a kind of an opportunity to say what you think needs to happen. I don't know if, yeah.
We have done some research about, again, I'll get back to public behavior and how we can protect ourselves when heat coming. It's about, as I said, while retrofit is a long-term and expensive, alongside retrofit plan and changing buildings and our environment, we can focus on risk communication. I need to say that risk communication in the UK is based on early warning system, red, yellow, amber, that we can see in the news. But the fact is, these risk communication in the UK is not persuasive enough to encourage people to take action, whether no matter they live in flat, in different houses, whether they are rented or they own house, the building. So based on the research that we have done on the effectiveness of these early warning system.
I think someone's going to come on to that in a minute. Sorry, we've just got some questions on communication in a minute. So can I just push you on if there's anything the built environment can do? Because my bit's just on kind of that
you
bit.
asked
and then
what GLA can do.
Yeah. And then, but sorry, it was the way I asked the question, but I think someone's going to come on to kind of asking, giving you the opportunity to talk more broadly about those bits. So
My point is, while GLA in long term can focus on retrofit planning and changing structure, we can focus on, in long term, we can focus on risk communication and changing behavior. This is really fit at the GLA level. That was my point.
Yeah, no, and you'll get some moment in. I'll just finish off with Polly and Emma on this bit, and then I think someone's going to come to you on those bits. Just on the built environment, like what we can do, I guess, to change the.
Absolutely. So heat risk isn't just a built environment issue, it's a public health issue, it's an energy issue. And I think Emma made the point very well, which was all of the experts that the GLA has available to it, are already talking to each other. But I think we need more of those cross-team, cross-sector conversations to make sure every investment in London is a heat-resilient investment in London.
Great, thank you. Emma, anything to come in on that bit?
Yeah, so I hope in the restructuring that's going on that this is emphasised rather than de-emphasised, because I think given how you and hopefully other members of the committee are finding this quite scary, quite big, the last thing we want to see happen is resource cut or taken away when there is such great expertise that exists across the GLA. I think the other thing is something I mentioned earlier with the launch of the heat plan this summer. I really do hope that the Mayor, encouraged by this committee, can engage with those members of the private sector, those developers, those landlords, those investors, and really make something of that moment that perhaps delivers on some short-term benefits whilst we grapple with this bigger long-term issue. So I think there's some really important convening and challenging of those working in this sector to make sure that the heat risk is understood and how big it's going to grow. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do think it's interesting. We've talked a bit around retrofit, and I don't want us to lose that as a committee in terms of its importance. I know it is often seen as really expensive, but I think that's why we need kind of government funding for it. But yeah, I'll go on to other Assembly members. Thanks.
Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
10. Yeah, Mary just started talking about it all, and I stopped her from doing it, so you've got to let her have a chance.
How significant is the role of education and effective communication in improving heat resilience? Earlier on, Polly, you talked about trellises and all the rest of that, and that hadn't even crossed my mind that might be important. So how important is that role?
Happy to start, and I know Mary has got some excellent research she'd like to share. I mean, a heat policy or a heat plan is an excellent start, but it's not enough to reach everyone and bring everyone along with us. So education and communication is really key, and I think it kind of needs to happen at a number of levels. So for the most vulnerable people, the focus should be on raising awareness of heat risk and the solutions to it, with the people who look after those vulnerable people. For others who are able to kind of look after themselves and might have some disposable income, it's about showing them what good looks like, and working with the private sector to kind of stock relevant products and to kind of showcase the benefits of external shutters or kind of certain types of plants for your balcony or your back garden. So it really does cut across all levels of society, levels of income and knowledge. I suggest we have a national awareness campaign, maybe kind of zoomed in a bit at the London sort of Southeast England level where heat risk is particularly acute. We are calling for a sort of Shade London initiative just to highlight just how important shade is for keeping London and Londoners cool and safe during hot weather.
Doctor?
Yeah, as Polly mentioned, education and risk communication has important role in reducing heat-related, mortality and heat effect. In the UK, risk communication, as I said, is based on early warning system, yellow, red, and amber. And it's interesting to know that based on UK Health Security Agency data, most of heat-related mortality occurs when yellow warning is on, which is the least impacted one. And based on our research on the effectiveness of these early warning system, there is a information-rich gap. Nearly 30% of population in England are not exposed to heat health alert. In London, it is nearly 25%, which is, if you consider London population, it would be more than 2 million of London population, means they are not exposed to heat alert. And based on our correlation study, these populations are mostly elderly and low-income earner, which can be due to digital exclusivity. So this information gap is not something that can be filled at national level. It is exactly fit at GLA level, city level. So it is where London Authority can play a role because they have closer proximity with this population on the ground, and through some kind of community-based interventions, they can fill this gap and reduce heat-related mortality. As I said, this heat mortality occurs when yellow warning is on, means these messaging and communication are not salient enough to encourage and persuade people to take action.
What more could a mayor do? Because I work in the building and I've never heard of this early warning system. First I heard. And what more, because my relationship with this is that the mayor didn't plant the 2 million trees he promised. That's the only reason this subject has continually come back to me. So is there very particular steps that the Mayor of London can take to get this information across?
Yeah, definitely. As I said, this gap is not something that can be filled at national level. This is something that can be done through some community engagement and community interventions. Elderly, most of them or some of them are digital exclusive, so they don't watch, they may not engage with social media or media app or watch the news, so they are not aware that heat is on and heat alert is on. So at this is where local authorities can act and increase this awareness and educate people and have this risk communication at community level.
Okay. Emma, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, quite a bit, but I'll try and do it succinctly. So there have been some extraordinary campaigns and campaigns that will come. Polly's organisation, working, I think, with the Islington Climate Centre, has done 40-degree stories. So stories about how people and their community were impacted during the 40-degree heat wave. We've got the Cool Off in Culture campaign, which the British Film Institute is working on with Arts Council England, and that is having mapped all cultural organisations across London from flood and heat risk, which of those places, museums, cinemas, theatres, could open to particularly communities that do not have as much green space, but could cool off in those buildings. I think using the arts, culture, but also sporting sector to highlight when we are at risk at climate change. The figure I have, which relates to flooding, is 120,000 grassroots football matches were cancelled cancelled due to flooding during 2023. That's a figure that the chair of Sports England shared with me. I'm sure we've got other stats for overheating. And again, this is a way that you can get out to children, to communities, to those that don't necessarily have the channels that we have.
Emma, can I just jump in on you? Because I just want to pose another question to you while you're giving these stats. How do we go around educating people and not terrifying them? A lot of people in the Green Movement over lockdown made lots of children scared. You know, children deciding it was the end of the world because of what they were hearing. So how do we give this message without terrifying people? And how do we knit it into culture so it becomes the norm? Again, my parents are Jamaican. Nobody in Jamaica worries about the heat. They just kind of deal with it. It's the norm. So how do we give the message without scaring, and how do we make it culturally just something we do?
I think we have to be true about what the risk is. We have to be clear what the risk is, but I think we have to give solutions. And I think my fellow panelists and I have given plenty of things that you can do, and taking cool off in culture or using sports as a way of saying these are the risks, but these are the things that you can do to prepare for these risks are really important ways of getting that information across. I think naming heat waves, we've seen that when the Met Office started naming storms, particularly those with flood risk, the press then picks up on those names and you get a different level of engagement. This is something that other parts of the world have started doing. I think it's Seville in Spain, now names its heat waves. That gives an urgency, but a clarity about some of the steps that you can take when you know a heat wave is coming. And then I'm also aware that there is a London philanthropic organisation, a London-facing philanthropic organisation. I'm not sure I'm at liberty yet to disclose it publicly, but is wanting to help community groups across London prepare for climate change with a specific focus on environmental and social justice. So making sure that where they can support organisations, it's very much at that community level. And I think this is where London and other funders, including the private sector, could work jointly with these organisations to make sure those most vulnerable are most prepared to understand the risks that they are facing, but also the very, very simple steps that they can take to be prepared for heat waves. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely.
In terms of how to engage, how to educate people, not terrify them, it's about how we design our message, our heat message. We need to co-design this heat message with them, starting from planning with them, engaging with the vulnerable group in designing this heat message, not to terrify them but educate them. So when they are well aware of the heat risk, so we are not terrifying them by educating them.
And this is just
we have to
one question. Maybe I'm asking you, Chair. Who is best placed to start naming our heat waves? Can the Mayor do that? Is that something we can ask the Mayor to do? The Mayor's office? I like the idea of naming a heat wave.
We can certainly look into that and look into making a recommendation around who should be naming the heat waves. I know we could go on all day because it's been such a fascinating topic, so thank you everyone so much. We've now reached the end of the first panel discussion. I would like to thank our first panel of guests for attending today's meeting and for their contributions. We'll now take a short adjournment for 5 minutes while we change panels. Planning and Welcome back to the London Assembly's Planning and Regeneration Committee. We now continue our discussion on whether London's homes are ready for a heatwave, and I would like to welcome our second panel of guests. In the room, we have Dr. Anna Mavrogianni, Professor of Sustainable, Healthy and Equitable Built Environment, Bartlett School of Environment, Energy and Resources, University College London, and Ed Helzert, Head of Energy at the Centre for British Progress. Joining us remotely, we have Matthew Scott, Policy Manager at the Chartered Institute of Housing, and Joel Callow, Founding Director of Beyond Carbon. Welcome to you all, and thank you very much for joining us. We'll now go on to our questions, and the first question is from myself. We'll start with Anna and Ed in the room before going to Matthew and Joel online. And the question is, where are the greatest risks to overheating in London's housing stock?
Thank you. So I think we heard quite a lot about current overheating risk across the London's housing stock during the first panel. So I'll just reiterate some of the unique risks that London faces. So one is the urban heat island. As we heard, urban environments are warmer than their rural counterparts. The London's heat island is something that needs to be considered when we design especially larger housing developments, and potentially use localized local urban climate weather data to inform our building design. Another important factor is the aging population that we have in London. So people, we know that people above 65 years of age are highest risk of overheating. Age might also be a proxy for various underlying health conditions, including cardiovascular, respiratory, neurological conditions that might increase someone's sensitivity to heat. And we also heard earlier about the concentration of densely built up dense areas and also lower socioeconomic groups, and how this might exacerbate, how heat is an additional layer that might exacerbate systemic inequalities and inequities. Yeah, I don't know if I could keep going. But
I don't have a lot to add to that. Urban heat island effect, flats and mid-terraced houses seem to be most vulnerable. And then there's the sort of regional satellite data as well, which seems to correlate with areas of deprivation can be more affected by that heat island effect.
Thank you. Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with Anna that I think this was covered really well in the first panel. I think there's a couple of things that I would just re-emphasise. I think the first is around the broader risks to the economy and society. People need a safe space to call home if they're to contribute to economy and to the society. And we've seen sort of different bits of evidence around this. So we know from some of the work that we did with Dr. Khosravi on the last panel that in that summer of 2022, around half of the population nationwide suffered disrupted sleep. There's a really good correlation between disrupted sleep and productivity at work, particularly the next day. And we found through that survey that a quarter of people who responded to our survey reported negative effects on their ability to work as well. And we also know that there's broader costs to the NHS. Excess heat as an HHSRS Cat 1 hazard costs the NHS about £420,000 a year, and there's kind of lost productivity there through illness as well. And there's a final impact on children that we need to consider, not just in terms of their health and well-being, but their ability to thrive at school. If they're having disrupted sleep, if they can't sleep because their home is too hot, it's much more difficult for them to prosper the next day and more generally in their education. And then the second point in the first panel that I would just reiterate is the broader risk, particularly around wildfires. Emma mentioned that ring of fire around London. Of course, we've seen in that summer of 2022 some homes, I think in the London Borough of Havering, being directly affected by wildfire. And that is going to increase as summers get hotter and drier as well. So apart from those two, I do think the first panel covered it well, but I just wanted to add those.
Thank you, Joel.
No, nothing to add. That's great.
Brilliant. Thank you all very much. And We'll come to Assemblymember Lord Bailey for a supplementary in a second. But are there any particular design trends in modern development that may be increasing overheating risk? We obviously heard a bit about tall buildings. We had an interlude about that in the first panel, but is there anything to do with the shape of windows, or is there anything at all in the design of modern buildings, particularly maybe modern flats, that is making this problem worse?
Can I respond to that one?
I think we had Anna in the room, and then, we can come to you, Joel.
Oh.
Yeah, I'll just mention very briefly again. It was already mentioned during the first panel that I don't know if it's a new trend for a while now. There is a lot of emphasis on having large glazing areas in a lot of housing developments. I walk around London and I see this all the time, and there is no provision for solar control, so shading. I know we will cover part of later on, but the lack of shading and large non-openable glazed areas, I see this as a very important risk factor for overheating in flats in particular.
Thank you, Joel.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And to add to that, as we are designers of both new buildings and retrofitting existing buildings in London and elsewhere, so I'm speaking as a practitioner here. I'm also speaking as a representative of the Passive House Trust, by the way, so I need to be clear when I'm doing one or the other. At this point, I'm speaking as a practitioner. There are two key issues for designers of new buildings that are causing the issue with large glazing you've just described. There are market forces as well, but the design issues are the planning system, which pushes for daylight criteria that are so challenging on many sites that they require larger windows to achieve them. They effectively contradict the overheating conditions in Part O, and the team are left to make a judgment call about where they draw the line between those two regulations. And of course, if there's a choice, the developer will tend to choose larger windows because they look good. So at the moment, our regulatory system, as it's applied in the planning system, plus building regulations, is a direct cause of the issue you're describing of large windows. And I'll add to that it's a very slow process to help the planning system sort of writ large across the UK, but certainly in London, to understand the need for shading. Shading is not a part of our architectural historic vernacular in the UK in any meaningful sense at all, because our climate didn't really require it in previous decades and centuries. So both on heritage buildings that already exist and on new buildings that are being constructed to planning requirements in the UK, it's actually very hard to convince the planners to let us put shading on the buildings, because it doesn't look like a British building once we've done that, particularly shutter systems, which are the most effective available. So I would say designers are definitely at fault. Don't hear me throwing rocks at the planners and saying it's all their fault. But designers that are trying to do it right, of which there are many, are trapped in a very complex system with contradictory aims and left to make judgments about those contradictory aims.
That is very helpful to hear. Did anyone else have any contributions on this particular point? If not, we'll move towards Assemblymember Lord Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask the Doctor, has any major city dealt with the urban island heating effect?
So I think there are several examples from other countries, for example, Mediterranean countries, where they have been dealing with heat risk for a very long time. They also have, I would say, more of a culture of heat. But you can see how their urban environment design in such a way that it protects, it can improve outdoor thermal comfort, and this is through measures that were mentioned earlier this morning, so combinations of green and blue infrastructure, but also structures such as pergolas or structures that are part of existing buildings, ventilation pathways, in the urban environment, so different strategies that could contribute to improve outdoor thermal comfort at the local level, so the neighbourhood level, but could also potentially reduce the urban heat island intensity at the city scale level.
Okay. And Ed, you talked about areas of deprivation mapping onto people who are at higher risk of overheating. Is there a why to that? Is it because they live in bigger buildings, smaller buildings, in the corner? Is there a why?
So the sort of study I was inherently quoting was a frontier economics one from 2023, and that was based on satellite data. So I imagine that would be relating to just how much concrete tarmac there might be around those areas. So the actual experience of people in buildings could be worse than that satellite data suggests, because that might be exacerbated by living in smaller homes with less good ventilation.
Or it could be better. Because the other thing about London is that many of our housing estates, certainly the 1950s ones, were built with green surrounding them, as opposed to our newer ones, which are blocks on top of tarmac, quite frankly. So I asked that question because I think we need to... A lot of assumptions are made about people and their situation. I think the data piece needs to be better about the why. I'd be very interested in why. And forgive me who talks about the ring of fire, but is there a tension between our need to have green space and then constructing an internal ring of fire? Because if we put green space everywhere, but then it sets alight, how do we answer that question, giving more green space but not increasing the ring of fire? Who is it who mentioned ring of fire? Was that one of our online guests?
I'm happy to respond to that. I think, as was mentioned in the first panel a couple of times, it's a question of design choice and making good design choices that incorporate things like fire breaks, choosing plants, trees that are less likely to be a fuel load, so are less likely to catch fire and burn intensely. There are really good design choices that we can make to minimise the risk of ignition. And there's also good design choices that we can make for homes themselves to minimise the risk of homes potentially igniting through embers being blown beyond the range of a wildfire, so from a rural area towards an urban area. So it's a matter of design choice, and we can absolutely do it. We can absolutely design green spaces in a way that minimises their risk of catching fire.
I should come to the doctor and our other online guests, because you seem to both talk about non-opening windows, large windows versus windows that can open. Is a window more inherently of a risk because it cannot open? Is that the point you're making here?
Yes, so window design is really important for overheating mitigation, but also for ventilation. So we need ventilation, air exchange throughout the year to, for example, dilute internally generated pollutants, etc. So it's really important for indoor air quality throughout the year. At the same time, ventilation can also be important as a passive cooling measure during the summer, especially when outdoor temperatures are cooler, lower than indoors. So it's really important that through good design, a balance is achieved for these requirements. At the same time, windows can also be a significant source of solar heat gains. So it's about how we balance those potentially conflicting requirements. So having a non-openable window can be potentially it can potentially increase the risk of overheating because it adds to solar heat gains, especially if it's not shaded, but at the same time it does not contribute to the ventilative cooling potential.
Okay, thank you. I'll quickly come to Dr. Callow. Is there a technology that can help with the challenge that having larger windows can have? Because I used to live in a new build and it looked like a rabbit hutch because of the tiny windows. So I want a large window. I used to sit in my living room and hate the entirety of my existence because of that tiny porthole of a window. But there's some suggestion about solar heat gain, etc. So is there a technology that we can be using or a design technique to marry these two things up?
Absolutely. What I'd say before we get as far as technology, though, is that good design itself can address this whole issue comprehensively. It's not that we can't design to fix all these things, it's that at the moment the system doesn't support those measures that we would take in design. So to give an example, you can have a window almost as large as you like, but I wouldn't recommend you do, as long as it's shaded correctly with a certain kind of slatted shade that allows winter sun in, because human beings like winter sun, and they don't like having the sun blocked out when they haven't got much of it, like in January and February. Conversely, in the summer, we don't want any of the sun really to get in. It's certainly in the peak hours of the day when we're hot and uncomfortable in our room. You don't sit by your window in the sun when you're too hot. You retreat to a cooler part of the house, or dwelling, or space, or wherever you are. So you want shuttering systems or shading systems. These can be passive and they're quite straightforward to design, theoretically, that will do exactly that. And even a fixed window, which we've discussed already, can be shaded well that way. Now, I'd argue we shouldn't have any fixed windows in London from now on. That's a zero for me. All windows should open to allow ventilation where that's possible for acoustics and air quality, and where the temperature outside is lower than the temperature inside. So just to make a semantic point here, we're talking about overheating as a general problem. There are actually two problems that we're discussing. One, I think, is heat waves, and I would define those in the UK as temperatures above 35 degrees, just for the sake of today's discussion. And we're talking about hot summers, which is temperatures below 35, but let's say above 25. So 25 to 35, hot summer, that's the predominant thing people talk about when they talk about overheating. 35 plus, that's a heat wave, which such as 2022 in London and the southeast. In the latter case, in the heat wave case, a well-designed modern apartment with appropriate shading would be better having the windows closed, all of them closed, than open, because by that point, the insulation and the air tightness and the mechanical systems that are designed into a low-energy building these days are actually aiding the building in staying cooler than the outside temperature. Once the outside temperature is higher than the inside, windows are a problem when they're open and a solution when they're closed, subject to other factors. It's a very complex problem, and it's going to require us all to learn to behave in ways that we are not used to behaving. We're typically thinking, oh, it's hot, I'll open the windows. It's exactly the right idea until it's about 35 degrees, and then it's exactly the wrong idea. And you need a well-designed building to protect you from those higher temperatures.
Just a quick question while you're formulating your last few words. Mm-hmm. Could this be addressed in building regs? Is it that simple as changing building regs? I know changing building regs isn't simple, but could you lay this down? Could this be codified and put in the building code?
Yes.
Thank you.
I was just going to make a final point that if anyone was tempted or had comments made to them along the lines of, but it's very hot in Spain and they do fine, or it's very hot elsewhere in the world, just to mention that we have a uniquely challenging climate in the UK. We have genuinely cold winters, mild but cold, that require a substantial heating season for most parts of the UK, for most buildings most of the time. And we have these awkward spikes in high temperature that occur for just a day or two at a time. It's a very different climate context from the sort where you get 6 weeks or even 3 months of high temperatures, and your whole building system, the way you build and how you behave, are attuned to 3 high temperature months, and your body is able to also acclimatise to that higher temperature. When you have spiking heat waves like we do in the UK, there's not time for all the human physiologies of all the people in London to acclimatise to 40 degrees before it's no longer 40 degrees anymore and you're back to normal temperatures again. So we do not have a hot climate. We have a difficult, spiky maritime climate that requires well-insulated buildings for the winter and well-protected buildings for the summer. So we have to form our own route through this problem. There's no direct parallel with others because there's no climate exactly like ours in the world. There are good precedents elsewhere, but there are no precise parallels.
I think you're correct, because sitting here in the cold talking about overheating is, it does things to your brain. And I can see that most of the conversation we've had in this building has been about cold homes, and it's led, and the vernacular of London is trying to defeat cold, not warm. It would take a big change. Chair, back to you.
Assemblymember Boff.
Thank you. Mr Scott, the Chartered Institute for Housing's response to the government's National Planning Policy Framework consultation identified overheating as an area where further action is required. What would you like to see the NPPF include that it doesn't already?
Thank you. It's a really good question. I think there's two main responses to it. So we are responding to the NPPF that's currently out for consultation now. It was mentioned previously that it's closing later today. There's two changes I think we'd like to see in the main. I think one is for the NPPF itself, and then one is specifically of interest to the GLA. I think the first is that we would like to see it take a much more strategic approach to preventing overheating and other climate risks. Currently, there's reference to things like radical reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. There's reference to improving heat adaptation and improving climate adaptation, but it isn't specific about what those things should be. So we're recommending that, firstly, radical reductions in greenhouse gas emissions should refer to the Climate Change Act and the carbon budgets that are set out within that. And we are recommending that climate adaptation should make specific reference to the advice by the CCC that was mentioned earlier, that the country needs to be prepared for 2 degrees of warming by 2050 and that we can't rule out 4 degrees of warming by 2100. So we need to see that as the strategic wrapper for the NPPF. So rather than siloing heat adaptation in a certain part of it, we need to be making all of our planning decisions across the country with climate resilience in mind. And the second thing I think we'd like to see, and this is specifically relevant, is that the new, or rather draft NPPF includes a policy called PM13. And this policy has been included specifically to prevent local planning authorities and strategic authorities from going beyond national building regulations, apart from in 2 specific instances, which are around accessibility and water efficiency. And we would like, in addition to that, and that addition would allow authorities like London through the London Plan, but also local planning authorities within London and the broader south, to be able to set tighter overheating regs. Because at the moment, say if you went away and you want to set a tighter Part O for Greater London, you can't do that because the draft NPPF will prevent you from doing that. So we're recommending an addition in there that will give the GLA the power, if it wants to set a tighter Part O that, as Joel says, can deal with this problem if it's set. So those are our 2 main recommendations. We've got other smaller ones, but those are the ones that I would highlight.
So you're basically trying to tell them that London is a different place?
Yeah, if you think where I am up in the northeast, there is less of a sort of pressing argument for a much more powerful Part O in the northeast than there is in London. There is still an argument for it, but it's not quite as strong. So a local planning authority in the northeast might not need a stronger Part O, but London absolutely does. And as I say, at the moment, you're prevented from being able to do that by the way the draft NPPF is set out.
And how would you respond to those people who say the more you pile in the NPPF, the less homes you get built?
I think I would probably agree with some of the points that Emma made before, is that this is not just about quantity of homes, it's about quality of homes. The purpose of a home is to provide somebody with a stable...
I think they're fairly inextricably linked. It is a policy decision that you have to make, but you have to weigh up quantity and quality, because if you increase the quality, the quantity goes down.
I think
isn't that inevitable?
I think it's a trade-off that we should try and frame differently. I think Emma was absolutely right earlier to say that if we're not making those additional investments now, we are going to need to make them in the future to protect people, and it is going to cost more to do so in the future. If that is being funded by public money in the future, that means in the future there's less public money to spend on new homes then. So I think we need to reframe it a little bit, and I think we need to be more cognizant of the role that homes play in providing a really stable foundation for people to thrive, to contribute to the economy, to be productive, and to participate in society.
Thank you. And now, perhaps to Dr. Mavrogianni, London's cooling hierarchy has been established. Is it still fit for purpose? And specifically, I want to know where you think when active cooling may be needed.
Yeah, thanks for this question. I think it's a really important point to discuss, especially ahead of the revision of the London Plan. As we heard earlier this morning, the cooling hierarchy, the GLA's cooling hierarchy, policy SI 4, I think, is evidence-based, and I think it's fantastic. And I think there is still very much place for it in a revised plan. But I think we do need to consider the careful integration of active cooling options, not necessarily as a last resort anymore. I'd like to mention that at the UCL Institute for Environmental Design and Engineering in January this year, we held an event with the title, Should the UK Embrace Air Conditioning? And we invited speakers from academia, the industry, policy, to discuss where we stand at the moment, and should we really be embracing active cooling solutions, and One of the points made during the presentations, the panel discussion, is that we should be designing buildings for good active cooling, for good air conditioning, which means that we need to avoid lock-in solutions and maladaptation, again, as was said earlier by Emma and others. So I guess what we mean by this is, in response to an extreme heat event like the 2022 heat wave that we experienced, people might go out, purchase portable air conditioners, which might be quite costly to run, not that energy efficient compared to a more efficient air conditioning system, or a reversible heat pump that also provides cooling as well as heating. And this locks in risks and could potentially lead to cooling poverty, as mentioned earlier, and again contribute to health inequalities and inequities in the future. So the question is, how do we intervene in the system and integrate active cooling in a way that protects those most vulnerable people and at the same time reduces carbon emissions? And just to add to this, I really think that overheating should be framed as an energy issue and not only as a health and comfort and well-being issue.
And perhaps if Mr. Heslett, you can answer that.
Thank you. So on the hierarchy, I think the concept of a hierarchy is somewhat unhelpful, in that the way I look at this issue, and the fellow panellist who explained the difference between sort of hot summer temperatures and heat waves, and how, you know, like window opening behaviour should change once the outside temperature is warmer than the inside. To me, it appears that the passive measures, particularly things like shading, are very important, but fundamentally the real health risks are at the heat wave conditions, and therefore passive and active measures are doing slightly different jobs. We want passive measures to ensure that people aren't locked in to properties that force them to use air conditioning more than they otherwise might, that would cost them money. But I would say that the active measures are very important with dealing with tail risks of very, very high temperatures. And I think the way the hierarchy is framed puts these two technologies in opposition much more than sort of working together with one another. And to the point about lock-in, to give sort of a personal example, I have a £300 portable aircon unit that I use in the summer months, maybe 20 days a year. My wife's a doctor, she works nights. It makes an awful lot of sense for us to use it. The energy efficiency ratio on that device is 2.6. You can get good air-to-air heat pumps that are 3 to 4, so probably a third more efficient. And in practice, it's very much worse than that, because I leave a massive gap in the window. The device sits in my house, it expels hot air. That air that's left my property then has a vacuum effect, which pulls in hot air from outside. So in reality, if temperatures do increase as predicted, the appropriate counterfactual is not people failing to adopt active cooling. I'm fairly confident that if things get bad, people will go out and buy lots of inefficient devices, and therefore it makes a lot more sense to think about how we incorporate active cooling efficiently in advance.
I've got one of those devices. I bought them on a whim because it was on offer. But I don't use it that much because they're so bloody heavy. I can't get it downstairs. So it has to be really, really hot for me to switch that on, I must say. You've said that you've said effectively that passive and active cooling systems need to work together. Is that a fair point? Perhaps if I can open that up. Yes, please. Yes.
By the way, I am raising hands electronically, but I'm not sure it's visible to most of the room. So
sorry, we're not. Yeah.
I'll interrupt rudely. That's probably the best way. Just to speak to a couple of the issues that have come up in the last few minutes. First of all, no such thing as a free lunch. So the quality versus how much we build question. There are occasionally, very occasionally, free lunches. So if I can speak to a very specific set of circumstances in which we have found a way to build better quality, include active cooling, avoid overheating, manage 40-degree temperatures, and not increase resident bills. In fact, they are decreased overall as a consequence. This is not a one-size-fits-all for everything everywhere, but it does work beautifully on London apartments. New build only, that's Part O's jurisdiction, obviously. If we do Passive House certified apartments, which we are now doing with a number of developers, and I'm speaking partly on behalf of the Passive House Trust here, but as a practitioner, I agree with all of this, and we bring into those contexts an exhaust air heat pump system, which I can explain if it's necessary, but I'll leave the assumption people know what that is for now. You get a beautiful situation where the resident running costs are dramatically lower than they would have been on any other possible outcome. District heating, not passive house, anything else doesn't compete with this product. It costs about the same to build if done right as a normal London plan compliant project would do, and we're doing it with developers because they've chosen this route instead, because they can afford to, which is the ultimate litmus test of affordability. Will they build it? Yes, then they can afford to. And the outcomes are phenomenal. We're talking about space heating costs, so fuel costs of £80 a year. Real numbers, not faked. Now, this is not standing charges. This isn't electricity for other uses. This is just what it costs for space heating. Hot water would be probably somewhat over double that, depending on how much they use, of course. Cooling is about £20 a year in this system, which keeps the house below, I think it's 31 degrees from memory, in a heat wave, 32 in a heat wave, and below about 26 the rest of the time. So it's not air conditioning, it's not super comfortable, like 31 isn't a great temperature, but you're not at risk of heat fatalities. You're keeping people safe through a very marginal, very small system. And whilst it does that, it heats the hot water for the apartment. So you pay for some cooling for 20 quid, and you get 20 quid's worth of hot water thrown in. Effectively, you're either paying for hot water and getting free cooling or vice versa. Sounds too good to be true. I would have said it was 5 or 6 years ago. I've been doing it repeatedly since I came across this sort of magic solution for this particular building type. It should be what we do all the time in London everywhere. It solves all the problems at once. Fuel poverty, carbon emissions, and overheating and heatwave resilience are all dealt with comprehensively in one package that doesn't cost more to build. So you heard it here first.
And that technology is possible now and planning compliant?
No, it's entirely not planning compliant because it cannot be district heated and should not be district heated. And I would be very clear here that district heating is a beautiful technology when rightly applied to leaky, inefficient buildings that need a lot of heat, and exactly the right way to decarbonise those difficult buildings, and it's exactly the wrong way to add carbon footprint to a very low heat building like a passive house. And it causes them to overheat, and there's not really a lot you can do about that. It just adds cooling loads to buildings, even if it's well insulated and designed. Only the Generation 5, 5th gen heat networks don't add heat to buildings, and they're very, very expensive to deploy at citywide at the scale. No one's really done that. So district heating sits alongside daylight regulation and planning objection to shading as a reason why regulation is causing overheating rather than preventing it.
And of course, one of our other committees is actually looking at district heating at the moment. Dr. Calloway, perhaps you could send us some information on that, because it sounds like a topic that we'd it sounds like a technology we'd like to investigate. Would anybody else like to come in? But we've got so many. Something that I've got on the record here is that passive and active work together, but we're also. I believe that the debate about air conditioning is that it's begrudgingly accepted as the last resort, when actually it's something that should be factored in at the start of a process. Is that right, Dr. Mavrogianni?
Yeah, if I could come in on this. I think it is being gradually accepted by the public, and I think it's research by University of East London, Dr. Khosravi, who was at the panel earlier, showing that air conditioning installation has almost risen sevenfold between 2011, where it was roughly 3%, to over 21% by 2022. So it's something that's already happening and we cannot ignore. But I would like to reiterate the point made earlier about the cooling hierarchy. I believe that there is still a point to be made about prioritising passive cooling solutions to a great degree. And as was mentioned earlier, this could work alongside active cooling solutions. But we need to install or design passive cooling strategies, because this could potentially empower residents, and we don't over-rely on, say, the grid. So if there is a blackout, there are solutions there that could maintain comfortable indoor temperatures for a longer time. And also they could reduce overall cooling loads, or the time when an active cooling system might be switched on. This could be delayed. So we would be looking for shorter periods of time when active cooling might be needed. And just to add one more point, is that we are talking so far about the current climate, and we should not be designing buildings for a fixed climate. We should also be looking at a range of climate change scenarios. So CIPSI, the Chartered Institution of Building Service Engineers, recently, last September, released UK CP18 weather files that could be used for dynamic thermal simulation. So I think it's really important that this becomes the norm in building design and modelling.
Thank you. Anybody else want to come in for that? I could spend a lot of time on this, but we've got a firm stop.
Can I quickly comment on?
Yes, please. Very quickly.
Part O, and so Part O is linked to the CIPSI weather files that we just mentioned. At the moment, it refers to the previous iteration, so the cooler type. But crucially, it only ever asks for regulatory purposes that designers, such as ourselves, test it against what is quite a mild climate, actually. So it doesn't test future climates, it doesn't test heat waves. And when I took part in the Part O consultation a few months ago, and it was clearly said to me, Part O is not about managing heat waves. It's about hot summers, so 35 and below roughly. There are hotter files available, but they're not mandatory in any sense at all, and most designers don't use them because they cost money to buy. It's £5,000 per climate set, by the way, per user for the CIPSI files, which is far more money than many small businesses can afford to pay. So they ought to be free, and they ought to be mandatory in Part O. And then we're going to have to accept that if we make them mandatory, active cooling will become necessary. And at that point, we're going to need safeguards to push down the energy demands of active cooling. Just a quick point to the issue of rolling blackouts and energy cost and carbon, by the way. I'm going to say quite boldly here, within the next decade, the issue of summer consumption of electricity for cooling will be a non-issue. So we're worrying about an issue now that looks a problem, but it won't be. We're going to have too much solar power. According to growth curves and projections of likely solar deployed in the UK, most of the time in the UK, when cooling would be necessary, there'll be too much solar power in the grid, and it'll be next to free. Conversely, in the winter, when we're heating the buildings, it'll be extremely expensive, and it'll also be much higher carbon in the winter than it is in the summer. So our smallest problem by far in all of these difficult issues of energy, climate and resilience is the carbon content and cost of summertime peak electricity. That will become vanishingly not a problem. In my personal opinion, it's a projection and a prediction, not a reality yet, though it's getting there. It's already getting there on the variable tariffs that people now use for their homes. So I really don't think carbon or cost are the principal problem with cooling. I think it's about designing it down to a reasonable level so that the systems can handle the loads at any given moment. Of course, you can have all the solar power in the world, and if your local substation can't handle the load that's being drawn through it, you've still got a problem, which is the case across much of London.
Thank you, Chair. I'm almost tempted to talk about heat pumps, but that starts an awful lot more than... Mr. Scott.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to make one more point about Part O, which is we do need to improve it and we do need to make it mandatory, as Joel said, but I just want to highlight that it's currently not mandatory at all for buildings that are, or other homes that are produced through material change of use processes, most commonly permitted development rights. There was about 66,000 homes in London produced through this process since records began in 2006. But even when Part O came in 2022, it doesn't apply to those homes. So this is common office to flat conversions and similar things. And there's a lot of research showing that those homes are often very poor quality, they're often single aspect, they've often got other issues that make them more likely to overheat. And we've said in the past that we'd probably like to see permitted development rights as a whole sort of not be implemented, to be removed, but at the very minimum we need to see Part O in whatever form it takes applied to homes created through material change of use processes.
You're preaching to the choir on that one. Anyway, I'll hand back to the Chair at that point.
Thank you very much. And just a bit of a follow-up, firstly, to that discussion. My understanding is that it's currently in the planning system quite difficult to install an air conditioning unit in London, or if you're creating a new development, to have every unit have air conditioning, active cooling within it. Is that understanding correct, or am I misguided in that belief? And if it is correct, what changes would need to be made to London's plan's approach to active cooling? Anyone have any thoughts?
I'll certainly chime in, and hopefully my fellow panellists will have more educated views than myself. So there's clearly no barrier to having sort of like a portable unit, but I think a lot of the language in the London plan is pretty negative on the concept. When looking at single aspect housing, I think they have to avoid heating without relying on any energy-intensive mechanical cooling systems, although there may be changes in foot on the single aspect. And then there is also sort of language that's quite discouraging as well in terms of policy SI4 as well.
So if we're to deal with one of these problems of overheating, you think potentially some of that language needs to change within the London plan when we do this refresh that's coming later this year?
Yes, I think I would probably remove any explicitly anti-active cooling language. I think it's perfectly fine to have language that points out and makes sure that passive cooling strategies are in place and are prioritised to an extent and are the kind of first line of defence. But I think it's deeply unhelpful to have language that basically prohibits their use.
Thank you. Anna.
Yeah, just to reiterate the point about better integration and framing overheating as an energy issue as well as a health issue. So looking at the current London plan, I think there could be better integration. So, for example, there is the energy hierarchy and then on a different page, the cooling hierarchy. I understand the cooling hierarchy prioritises passive solutions, but I think restructuring and better integration of those parts, I think, would be quite important and would send a strong message that a more holistic approach is required towards climate resilience and design.
Thank you. Do either online guests have anything on that, or should we push on? Not seeing anything, so I think we can continue. Ed, how can active cooling be sustainably integrated into the energy system?
Yeah, very happy to talk on that. And sort of fellow panellists, I sort of echo many of his views on this. I think if we take a step back, I think the mindset that a lot of people have around electricity use and energy use is that it's something to be minimised. The electricity sector has already made very substantial improvements. So in 2024, electricity generation was 10% of our domestic emissions, and it was a quarter 20 years ago, back in 2004. The absolute emissions from the electricity sector have fallen 78% in that time. So they're the single most material contribution to Britain's decarbonisation progress. And a lot of our future decarbonisation processes are about electrifying another 50% of the emission block. 20% of that is buildings, basically heating, and then 30% being transportation. So we have a much cleaner electricity grid, and I was quoting 2024 numbers. We have already run the CFD auctions. We have already raised money to build nuclear power stations. So this is progress that will continue over the next 10 years. And the government's clean energy plan has 5% gas in the electricity system. Excuse me. So using electricity, in my mind, is not a problem at all, and not something we should discourage. Where you have to think about the electricity system and driving extra cost is if you are creating a new peak in demand, because that requires transmission and distribution upgrades, so the wiring that takes electricity to people's households, and may also require you to build new generation capacity for that very small time peak. So in the studies I've looked at, there's some work on this from the Energy Catapult and the UK Energy Research Centre. The peak demand in winter is going to dwarf that of any summer cooling, because whatever concerns you have about correlated aircon use in a heat wave, well, if it goes to -5 or -10, then you'll get a very similar effect in winter. So that is the much bigger problem. in terms of London specifically, which is most vulnerable to the overheating side of things, then it may be worth a conversation with the local distribution company, UK Power Networks, because distribution networks and wires, when they get hotter, they have thermal capacity limits if they get too hot, and they rely often on air cooling to cool them down. So that imbalance in London, there may be more constraint there, but I don't know. And then in terms of how we can make active cooling as sort of friendly from a carbon perspective as possible. Solar power, we already have about 20 gigawatts of solar. In the Clean Power 2030 plan, that more than doubles, or is assumed to more than double. Solar power peaks at sort of 1 o'clock, 12 to 1 o'clock in the summer. Temperatures admittedly peak a little bit later, more like 5 to 6 p.m. But it is anticipated that we also build quite a lot of battery storage. So there is a reasonable alignment, and especially the other panelists mentioned time of use tariffs. There will be, if these systems are incorporated well, then people should be getting a price signal that might encourage them to pre-cool their home at, say, 3 p.m. and reduce that peak load. The other sources of electricity, we are building more nuclear power. London is relatively close to quite a lot of interconnectors from France, which have a big nuclear fleet, which is very low carbon as well. And then to the wider point on what I think the status quo will evolve to without allowing for active cooling in new builds, the alternative, in my view, is that people buy individual air conditioning units, which are much less efficient. So it would be much better to have efficiency standards, like I believe there are in Part L for the efficiency of air conditioning units. And then also where we can for, particularly for larger projects, where we could utilise the heat recovery from a cooling system to provide things like hot water, which would also reduce the sort of urban heat island contribution. So sorry, I'll stop there.
No, thank you very much. That was so incredibly comprehensive. I completely understand what you're saying on the decarbonisation piece. Just on the generation side, so as a committee, we recently actually did another investigation into data centres and found that a proliferation of data centres is actually on the SSEN's network out in West London led to quite a significant delay of new housing coming forward, and there wasn't sufficient power, and people were being offered grid upgrades, grid connections in like 2037. But you think that with the contracts for different auctions that have come online, the new nuclear that's being built, you don't think generation will be a problem in the future, or do you think it's just the time of year that air conditioning would be used is at a time when electricity demand is much lower than in December, January?
Yes, that's a very good point. So I totally agree on the West London projects. We've basically had to wait for very significant substation builds to accommodate data centres, and that can cause controversy competing with housing. But if your existing electricity demand already peaks in winter, effectively what I'm arguing is that adding air conditioning in summer doesn't cause a new bottleneck to emerge, because you're already having to build for that peak winter capacity. And if you look at a profile of UK electricity demand, there's a very substantial dip in the summer months because people spend less time in the home, etc. But also, as more people have solar behind the meter on their rooftops, actually less and less goes over the transmission networks in those months.
If I could just add in there briefly, first, a personal anecdote. We have a battery and solar at our house, which we installed. It charges the battery overnight deliberately, and we almost never use peak electricity at all at any point in the year. So our additional load, our marginal extra load, is zero to the grid. Now, we still have to have a connection to it, which of course doesn't get around the problem of substation upgrades for theoretical need, but it does get around the problem of operational need in the case where batteries and solar are part of a mix of what people are doing in their home. Second thing to quickly add is, in the magic solution of Passive House plus exhaust air, the exhaust air system does the heating and the cooling at different times of year. Its peak load is very, very, very low. We're talking 300 watts, so dramatically lower than anything else you probably ever see in a building services system. And so it has no effect on the peak demand of the system. You have to have the same substation that you would have had to have for people's televisions and kettles in order to manage the loads for their heating and cooling system. So it's so small it just doesn't factor. It's hard to even measure the difference between it and a district heating solution. You can, and there's maybe a 10% difference, but it's so good and so low and so small that it's marginal to zero as a problem. The problem still remains connecting, but if you can connect and you can power your kettle, you can definitely power your exhaust air heat pump for heating and cooling winter and summer.
Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. Joel's slightly stolen one of the points I was going to make, but I just wanted to add on air-to-air heat pumps that were mentioned earlier, so a little bit different to exhaust air, but we work quite closely with a housing association called Orbit, and we've got homes up and down the country. They've just completed a trial of air-to-air heat pumps, and they found that it could provide the kind of sort of app-based pre-cooling and preheating that we've been talking about, but also had wider grid impacts as well. So they found avoided grid reinforcement costs through some of the work that they did, as well as increased cooling capability, and there's other work that's starting to show the same now. What is really interesting about air-to-air and also exhaust-to-air that Joel's talking about is particularly suitable for flats, so there is an option there for London that could be very good to explore. The second point that I just wanted to make was to bring it back to something that was mentioned a little bit earlier, which is cooling poverty. I'd probably prefer to call it energy poverty. And the biggest problem, I think everybody's right, the biggest problem that we're going to see here is not the actual electricity demand. It's going to be people's capacity and ability to afford to turn these things on when they need to. So if you look in London, we've got about 26% of people living in poverty, according to the latest GRF report on it. We've got continuing high electricity prices through the meter. And that is going to be a barrier to people turning on their air conditioning systems in the future. We've got quite well-established fuel poverty policy in England. So we've got the Warm Home Discount, which provides people with £150 off their bill in winter. We've also got the cold weather payment, which it gives people a payment if there is a period of low temperatures forecast in the winter. You can probably say where I'm going with this. We probably need a hot weather payment to be the equivalent to that in summer in the future, and we probably particularly need it in London. We particularly need it, my final point, is for people who've got an electricity prepayment meter. We know there's about 2 million rented houses in London. Rented houses tend to have prepayment meters more than kind of the average home. If someone is self-disconnected from their electricity supply, that AC unit's not getting run at all. Neither can they plug in a fan, neither can they have a cool shower if they've got an electric shower. Their only choice for a shower will be ice cold. So we need to think about how we're going to support people with the energy costs, and particularly those at the very, very sharp end of the energy crisis and affordability crisis as well. So I think there's a really important point here about, we install air conditioning systems, absolutely, but we also need to make sure people can afford to switch them on at the very height of those heat waves that the other panelist was talking about previously.
Thank you very much. And can I just confirm one point? Are air-to-air heat pumps the same thing as air source heat pumps? Or are they two different things?
They are two different things. So air-to-air is different to an air-to-water heat pump, and an air-to-water heat pump will give, it will put water through the pipes in the same way that your gas boiler does. It's a wet central heating system. An air-to-air heat pump is basically the same as an air conditioning unit, only it provides heating as well as cooling. Air conditioning units, as we understand them, typically just provide cooling.
And am I right to think that primarily it's air-to-water that are being installed in new developments in London?
Air-to-water, air source is usually what we're seeing, yes.
And those can't easily provide cooling, partly because the system for grants and so on precludes them from providing it, ironically, and partly because they are circulating fluids to radiators generally, which aren't suitable for then later providing cooling in the summer. Exhaust air, by the way, is air-to-air, but it's a very specific kind where you're taking heat from the exhaust airstream of your ventilation unit, which you already have, and you're pushing it into the supply air stream, which you already have. So it's like a bolt-on air-to-air system for your ventilation system.
Thank you very much. So potentially including exhaust-to-air or air-to-air rather than air-to-water could be better in terms of dealing with this problem, whilst also dealing with the problem of cold buildings in the winter.
Yeah, I think it's certainly worthy of further exploration in London, yeah.
Thank you. Ed?
Just as a point of information, the government policy, central government policy has changed a little bit on this. So it used to be that you could get a grant called the Boiler Upgrade Scheme, and that was only applicable to air-to-water systems. and that was a £7,500 grant. That's now been extended to air-to-air systems as well at a £2,500 level to account for the fact that air-to-air systems are cheaper. So there is some policy momentum on this at the moment.
So with them being cheaper, why were they not prioritised before?
I think there was a reasonable policy concern that people would basically use the grant to fit a new air conditioning system to their house, which wasn't like the intended approach of it. So I think it has to be used to replace an existing fossil fuel based heating system is the way they've sort of got around that, and that's why they've changed it.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you could have just claimed for it and actually just only ever used it to cool.
This is exactly the same point I want to make about the revised boiler upgrade scheme. I think it's great that air-to-air heat pumps are now also included. So this is a great example of iterative decisions that could be made, and the points where we could intervene and building heat resilience during, say, a retrofit or replacement of a gas boiler. So if there is a household who is considering replacing their gas boiler, having more information, awareness of the existing funding schemes, etc., education about the relative benefits, but also potential constraints in terms of, how much space would be required inside a dwelling, how do those systems compare against each other in terms of capital costs, running costs, etc. I think that's potentially a missed opportunity, and I think we could be doing more in this area, again, to provide more information and tools to the public to make informed decisions about which system to install, and especially looking into the future. Just to add one more last point, that for a lot of people in the UK and London, I think heat is seen as a temporary inconvenience, as something that they would be dealing with for a couple of days every other summer. So those kind of ad hoc, temporary DIY solutions are very common. But when these decisions are about to be made, like a gas boiler replacement, I think there are great opportunities there to do something that would be low carbon and, again, increasing climate change adaptation.
And just to follow up on that slightly, and agree with all of those points, there is an argument that you could help sustainability in the long run by basically offering a product that gives two functions. So one of the big barriers to heat pump adoption in the UK is the fact that electricity prices on the latest price cap are 4.3 times as expensive as gas. So even if a heat pump is 3 to 3.5 times more efficient than a gas boiler, it doesn't save you any money. That's one of the reasons I don't have a heat pump in my house. If you could get a product that offers you something the gas boiler can't, then at least it's not a straight cost comparison anymore. There's an extra feature that might make it more attractive to decarbonising your winter heating, which is very helpful from a climate perspective.
Thank you. And we mentioned in that brilliant discussion earlier in the discussion, some of the policy barriers and policy language which might disincentivise some of the active cooling measures we were talking about. Are there any other policy barriers, whether it be in the London Plan, building regs, NPPF, which are currently preventing wider adoption of efficient cooling technologies in the UK?
I could talk about Part O generally. Last
I think we will have a question specifically about Part O.
I don't know if maybe I could wait. Yeah.
Maybe we'll. Yeah, we can go on to Assemblymember Boff. You can ask about Part O.
Specifically Part O. Yeah.
So, are there any fans for Part O of the building regulations? And I think we've already heard earlier that there is some conflict between the NPPF and London's London situation. Is there also a conflict between Part O of the building regulations and London's particular requirements? Dr. Mavrogianni.
I don't know if there's specifically conflicts between London Plan, say the cooling hierarchy, and Part O, because both emphasise prioritising passive cooling solutions. But last month we published a paper analysing interviews with a number of stakeholders, again from industry, policy, etc. specifically on their experience of implementing Part O. And something that came up a lot was conflicts between Part O and other parts of the building regulations, such as Part L, Part F. So potential design conflicts, I think that was mentioned earlier as well, between energy efficiency targets, ventilation requirements, daylight and fire safety. So this is something that where, again, I think more coordination is needed as part of future building regulations revisions. Another limitation is obviously that it only applies to new housing, and we know that by 2050, 8% of the homes that will still be standing in 2050s are already here. So it's really important. I mean, Part O is, again, a great starting point, but we would like to see these regulations extended to retrofit as well. And something else that comes up is the fact that you can't include internal, again, there's a lot of emphasis on external shading, but you can't include internal blinds or shading provided by green infrastructure at the neighbourhood at the microclimate level. There are good reasons for this, and this could potentially be because of you then rely on maintenance of those trees or internal systems. A future occupant might remove blinds, etc. But yeah, I think there is more work to be done there to assess additional strategies.
Is there a way? I mean, I will just put that to everyone else as well. But is there a way of changing Part O that both represents the needs of, because it seems to me from a layman's point of view that Part O probably works in leafy Buckinghamshire, and it probably makes sense there, but it doesn't work for a very dense urban environment. Is that a fair point?
What I hear is that it can be quite difficult to achieve compliance in those more densely built up areas, and because the emphasis is very much on reducing internal heat gains and controlling solar heat gains. And this can be quite tricky, especially if you're trying to design for single aspects flats, etc. So, yeah, I think can be quite challenging. The risk there is that you might end up introducing active cooling instead of focusing on building design, because that might be the easy way out. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll go to the remote first. I don't know who was first, so forgive me if so I'll just randomly say Mr. Callow first.
Thank you. So just to point out that the two things that Part O most clashes with are the daylight regulations that are put through the planning system. So they're not national regulation, they are planning regulation in London. And acoustic regulations, which are very hard to interpret, are also embodied in Part O. And our most common problem as designers in London is that the acoustician or the acoustic surveys tell us that windows cannot be opened because it's too noisy. And therefore, in effect, at that point, the building has to have cooling, because you cannot mechanically keep the building cool without an active cooling system in most circumstances. There's occasional exceptions. So acoustics and daylight are the actual physics issues that affect real designers who are trying to do the job right as they clash with Part O. And that all needs to get aligned, including fire and Part L and Part F as well. I'd say L and F clash less, actually, with Part O than do acoustics and daylight, both of which are planning conditions.
Mr. Scott.
Thank you. I'm pleased Joe went first, because I know as a designer he'll be a lot more knowledgeable about Part O. I think the point that I was just going to make was building on the point about retrofit. I think one of the counter arguments that will be made about applying Part O to retrofit is that we already have PAS. Specifically, we already have PAS 2030 and PAS 2035 that have much the same provision for preventing overheating as Part O does. So it refers in particular to TM59, which is the CIBSE standard that was referenced previously. The problem with the use of PAS is that it is only mandatory through government-funded retrofit schemes. So if you have public funding, say from the Warm Homes Social Housing Fund, you have to adhere to the principles in the letter of PAS when you're doing that work. So you, in theory, have to building overheating measures into the work that you're doing and other ventilation measures as well. The problem with that is that there is a very large proportion of retrofit work done in this country that is not government grant funded. So if you're your average private landlord installing loft insulation or a different kind of insulation, there is a cost to going through PAS, so you're not going to do it. So what we need to see is this brought into the building regulation regime for retrofit as well, and I support the point that was made before. And I think one of the barriers that we have to overcome is this perception that PAS does it already. Our view is that PAS doesn't do it already, and we need to bring it into the building regulation system for it to be effective.
Thank you. And Mr. Heslip.
I'm afraid I don't have a great deal to add. I think the other panellists are more.
Thank you very much. I'll hand back to the chair then. Thank you.
I think you might have more, unless you're...
We had a question there on Passive House, but we haven't got the guest.
And then 19...
That's you, I thought.
Oh, I had it as
Oh, I mean, I'll do 19 if you like. Yep, okay. I'd written you down, sorry. So, Mr. Scott, what changes would you like to see made to the way that overheating assessments are conducted on residential buildings in London?
I think this is a question, to be honest, that I can speak less to. I think the one point that I would make is that we would like to see more consistent post-occupancy evaluation of the kind that was discussed previously. So particularly for new builds, the kind of work that goes and examines those homes to see, are they performing as they should? And makes an assessment as to whether they're performing as they should. But I think on the broader question of how assessments are being done in London and what we'd like to see, I think it's probably a matter for other panellists more than me.
Right. Anyone else about the assessments of residential? Sorry, did somebody?
Yeah, I can speak to that one. It's Joel on the remote. I mean, I think we've mentioned most of it already, but I think what I would summarise by saying is the regulation as it stands needs to address heat waves as well as conventional warm summers. It needs to adopt a friendly approach to the need for active cooling once other measures have been sensibly taken. And crucially, and this is by far the most important one, it must integrate with a wholesale revision of regulation so that they all refer to each other correctly and don't clash with each other. The principal challenge at the moment is the clash between planning regulations and national building regulations and the fact that they can't both be met. And so you have to effectively compromise on one or the other, normally the planning regulation for daylight. There needs to be a holistic position that all practitioners know about for both retrofit and new build, where all the regulations work in tandem with each other.
Yes, but some hope, really. Regulations always work against each other. Ms. Mavrogiani.
Yeah, just to add to the point on the need for more post-occupancy evaluations data, I think that's really important because overheating mitigation is a socio-technical issue, and I think we just go back to the earlier discussion during the first panel. I think we do have quite a lot of data and a good understanding of, for example, how different passive cooling strategies compare against each other for different housing typologies. What we need more information on is how different vulnerabilities, heat vulnerabilities, might interact with different systems, both passive and active. So a better understanding of those interactions, I think, would be really valuable. Looking at different types of vulnerability, both socioeconomic, different adaptive capacities, or, for example, I do some work with the Institute of Neurology at UCL, looking at heat risk and for people with neurological conditions. So there are some evidence gaps there. At the same time, I think, this shouldn't stop us from proceeding with action and policy change.
Do you think what overheating assessments should include the impact of the access of green space or the availability of green space and typology of the building as well?
Yeah, other panelists might want to come into this, but I think that's very, very important. And I think we shouldn't be looking at dwelling units in isolation. So the discussion earlier about tall buildings and top floor flats being at high heat risk. I think we also need to consider whether there are safe havens and areas within the community, cool spaces that I know that GLA has a cool spaces mapping platform, but yeah, spaces that could be accessible for heat risk, heat vulnerable people to go to, so that they're not necessarily trapped within their flats during a heat wave or other excess heat event. I think that community approach, and also connections with the community, and having someone looking after you during a heat event, I think this is also really important. It should be part of the conversation.
Anybody want to come in on that? If not, and now I'll hand back to the chair. Sorry, it was my error. I just realised I scribbled the wrong thing.
Thank you, Assemblymember Boff. And just coming onto that point around data, how would you assess the quality and comprehensiveness of data on overheating in London more broadly? And is there anything the Mayor, the GLA or any other bodies, boroughs could potentially do to help resolve any data gap we have?
I can go first. So as I said, I think there are amazing databases in London, the London Data Store, the climate risk mapping tools. There's a lot of data available already. I think also complementing this with a place-based approach and using more local data sets and local knowledge of the housing stock, for example, through local authorities, charities, etc. I think this is really important. But just to reiterate, this shouldn't stop us from acting. I think something that has come up from one of our research projects, interview with stakeholders and project partners, was that knowledge is not necessarily the issue. It's capacity, for example, within local authorities to act, to translate existing research findings into actionable outcomes. I think this what we find is a barrier.
Matthew?
Thanks. Yeah, it's interesting this. I think I've got a slightly more mixed view on the kind of quality and availability of data. I think as we've seen throughout this session, we do have quite a lot of different data sources, but they do sometimes show quite different things. I think if you look at the English Housing Survey, which has had questions on subjective overheating for a couple of years now, the prevalence that you get is much lower than some of the other estimates that are being mentioned today. So I think we do have a little bit of a patchwork view through the data that we have, and there are inconsistencies, I think, in the kind of data collection method. So a lot of this will depend on what question is asked, how and in what format. And also, are we talking subjective data? Are we asking people if their homes overheat? Are we measuring it? So I think we need a slightly more consistent way of getting to data on this. And I think I would have two suggestions. I think the one is through the National English Housing Survey. So this is the longitudinal survey that's been running for several years now. It collects information on sort of energy efficiency, loads of different things about building quality. It has had some questions on subjective overheating for about 3 years now, but there isn't any data collected through it, to my knowledge, that focuses on things like, are there shutters? Are there internal blinds? Is there sufficient shading? If we were to start the English Housing Survey collecting that data now, and it would do it consistently over a number of years, we start to get a really good picture at a longitudinal sort of level as to what the picture is. And then I think secondly, and this refers back to a point that Emma made earlier, there's an awful lot of social housing providers in London, and the GLA has a big convening power in London. I had a little look at the statistics just before this. There's apparently 780,000 social rented households in London, and we know that social housing providers are installing a lot of sensors in their homes now to measure things like humidity, temperature, and sort of other data points. If the GLA was to say to social housing providers in London, so housing associations as well as councils and ALMOs, everybody come together, let's pool all of your temperature data together, let's connect that to your asset management data, so the age of the home, the archetype, other information that you hold. Can we do a bit of work that really gets us a picture of what's going on inside homes? What is the temperature inside homes? How does that connect to the age, and so on and so on? You would start to get a really sort of rich and holistic data set that could inform some of the interventions that you might want to do. So I think we do need to make use of existing data as much as we can, but I think we need more consistency, and I think the best way to do that is through the English Housing Survey. And I think there's a real opportunity in London to bring social housing providers together to get a real picture of what's going on inside homes.
Thank you very much. And then, yeah, the final question for myself is, we'll start with Joel and then Matthew online, then bring it to panellists in the room. But just any final recommendations you might have for the Mayor when it comes to combating overheating in London?
Matthew, do you want to go first?
I was just about to say the same to you. I think that the one thing that's not been mentioned so far, and this goes back to the London plan, some of the discussions that we were having before, there's that kind of term and chapter in the London plan around green infrastructure, and it does mention blue spaces, ponds, and so forth. One of the recommendations we would make is to split green and blue infrastructure out. They have very similar kind of outcomes and purposes, but they are qualitatively different. So I think we would probably like to see a standalone chapter specifically on blue infrastructure and looking at its interactions with green space, but also with other parts of the London plan, like things on sort of sewerage and so forth. But I think apart from that, I pass to Joel, who's probably had enough time to think now.
Oh, thank you, Matthew. One quick one from me, that both as a Passive House Trust technical advisor and as a practitioner, would be, please could the London plan clearly reference the Passive House standard certified, because there's plenty of other versions that are not much use at all, certified Passive House as a deemed to comply measure with their energy standard and potentially with overheating as well. It really is the gold standard. It really is deliverable in London at scale and is currently being delivered. But at the moment, we're fighting a policy battle to get it accepted. We're doing better than everybody else and having to fight to do better. I'd love it if the London plan just clearly, with evidence base, reflected that reality and said, yes, please, Passive House is great. Please do it. Please certify it. That would be a really helpful step.
Thank you. Anna?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we do climate change mitigation adaptation together and they're not seen in isolation. I think one of the biggest barriers with achieving heat resilience is that heat risk is not really owned by a single government department or other authority. So we really need leadership in this area. So if the Mayor could lead in this through the London plan, promote coordination, I think that would be fantastic. But heat risk shouldn't be seen as an afterthought. I think it really needs to be integrated throughout the plan.
Thank you. Ed?
My very final thoughts would just be that I believe there were 4,200 housing starts in London in the 12 months to Q3 2025. So, you know, overheating is undoubtedly important, but I think we need to be pragmatic on all of these things. And you know, if single aspect homes allow more to be built, and you know that might require active cooling to make sure the heat management is fine. If our grid is getting cleaner and cleaner, that is fundamentally absolutely okay. And we should be pragmatic about this from London's housing perspective.
Thank you very much. We have now reached the end of the session. I would like to thank our guests for attending this meeting and for all your contributions today. The committee has a few more items of business to address, but in the meantime, you're welcome to leave the room or remain seated to observe our ongoing proceedings. Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the discussion? Can I ask the committee to note the work programme and the additional activity undertaken, namely the site visit with University College London citizen scientists around Royal Docks on the 9th of February 2026. The London Assembly's annual meeting, due to take place in May 2026, will decide which committees to establish for the 26-27 Assembly year and a timetable of meetings for those committees. I have no urgent business, which concludes today's meeting.